tea.
I'll buy you a tea. Oh, it's 2 teas then.
Can we share it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This is from Iran. That's fabulous. Oh, absolutely marvelous. Very beautiful. Is that honey? How do we do this? That's right. Oh, I see. I think that's meant as the cover. Plateaus, 1,000 of them. It smells divine. Yes, I think these are, I think, glued on.
Maybe.
But they are shells. So
It's just I think that there's I was sometimes predict too often. That's what it's just
There. That's good. Thank you very so much. How fabulous. I love pistachios. Pass them around. Okay. Lauren's here, so anybody who is going to be coming?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Last week he said yes.
Thank you. So what's new, everybody? So, you're prepared to speak. Gianpaolo should be here today as well. He was here earlier. Yeah, I had an hour meeting with him, so he was here.
Diane's supposed to be coming as well, but I've just sent her to send it.
Oh, okay, right. We'll wait a little bit longer. This should be poverty of philosophy. Just feel very important while we're doing philosophy to remember Marx, the good things he says. Can you pass me back the bowl? Actually, Grace, behind, or Mark, behind you are a bunch of bowls. Hi there, come on in. Yeah, it doesn't. There, yes. How are you?
How are you?
Yeah, good. Just printing off identity and difference, because I thought I had a copy and I also too. Thank you. So Barnaby's still, we're still waiting on Barnaby, and we're conceivably waiting on Gianpaolo, who I assume would be coming.
Yeah, it's all good.
He should be coming, right? So we'll just wait a few more minutes. Is that running?
Yeah.
I just want you to know, I have new glasses. And these glasses are like HD. So I feel very discombobulated because I now can see everything. They're so clear that it's annoying, actually.
Is it a special kind of lens?
Mm-hmm. They said, this is a very good lens. This is the lens you'll be able to see very clearly. You can do it so that you're, when you're reading, it's 15/20 as opposed to 20/20. And let me tell you, I can see hairs. I mean, it's very frustrating. You ever see HD television? It's really just not on. Anyway, so I like them, but they're just, you know. So if I'm going like this with you, it's because I'm actually seeing it a lot. Too much information. Maybe what we should do is begin, and then, who else was, you're presenting?
Next week.
Oh, you're presenting.
Yeah.
Is Barnaby presenting as well? I thought you were presenting with people. Are you presenting, Lauren?
Next week.
Hmm.
No, I'm in 2 weeks' time.
who's presenting?
I'm just following the
Well,
schedule.
Are you just doing it by yourself?
Yeah, just the identity lecture. Can't promise that we get.
Well, that's all right. Okay. Why don't we just shut the door then? So we're missing a few folks, but I don't know where they are. They should be here soon. Okay. Welcome. I'm sorry that I wasn't here last week, but you were in the capable hands of Mark. So that was very good. And there's been a lot of good feedback. I'm going to go around the table again, ask you to introduce yourselves. You see there's a new human being here. We're broadcasting. It's not live yet, but it will be eventually. Will that disturb you? Okay, good. We'll have to have that in writing later.
Right.
Okay, so why don't you begin, Dave, because you've done this more than once.
I'm Dane. I'm doing the MA final here, my second year part-time, and at the moment I'm looking at cognition, science of senses, and how
See how hard it is. You're going to have this one.
and just looking at how they sort of work together. My research looks at through film, mathematics, and quantum mechanics, trying to sort of feed those back into how to.
That's right. Already passing out. She'll come back. Mm-hmm. And what brings you to the PhD seminar?
I just like learning.
Yeah.
And,
You're infected, are you?
Mm.
Okay, good.
Prevalent.
We'll skip over here to Matthias.
I'm a first year PhD student.
Name?
My name is Matthias.
We met, yes.
And I work on emergence of sense as something that is not following the logic of representation, but finds its dimension, its properties in the way it functions. And I think that is what I'm trying to do with the research dissertation, is particularly visible in art, but it's everywhere.
Great, very good. And you just, have they upgraded you yet on your 9R? Is that in the middle of it?
No, we still have to talk about things.
Of course.
I'm Laura, and I'm interested in artists' events and research is on the notion of the work of, the notion of event the work of art and the criticality of events in contemporary arts and sciences, and it involves problematizing the criticality of arts events. Did I just say?
Yes, and if
I've been practicing
you're so
swimming in my
quiet, Lauren. I know that it's
We're
hard.
trying to get it to sound
Don't worry about how you sound. Just be slightly more louder.
Yeah, so, well, the politicality of art is event, and then there's a fine arts practice element involving growing environments. And the three key areas are approaches of immanence, dispossession, and immersibility.
That's good. Excellent.
I'm Mark, I'm a research fellow here, and I'm following the schedule, so we're looking at Heidegger quite closely. Yeah.
He already has his PhD in Adorno
That's right.
and is a musician.
Yeah, star of local radio.
No, really? When did that happen?
Last Friday before.
Good.
Community radio in Medway, sandwich between Versus Ledge and ELO.
Excellent. Well done, you. Okay.
I'm Grace. I'm first year practicing a PhD, interested in the supernatural mediumistic female body, and issues around how to authenticate the doubtful and how, interested in doubt and how that can lead to questions of kind of belief and what we believe in and why we believe in it.
Good.
My name is Sandra. I did my MA here. I'm sitting, and I'm not sure what I'm doing.
She's in the process of applying. You can talk about your application. No. No, I don't know. She just came back from Iran. She's tired. she'll come back. All right, your turn.
Okay, so my name's Diane. I'm an artist. I'm currently working for Shrewsbury Museum looking at contemporary art in a heritage context. I did my BA in Newport, so I looked at immersive environments, and then I did my MA where I looked at the heritage sector and amplifying the heritage sector with different types of technology. I worked in outsider art for the last 3 years, and I consider that to be the same thing as looking at immersive environments and amplifying reality, but it's just standing in a different corner of the room.
And how did we meet? You can tell them.
How did we meet? I went to a meal with an artist friend of mine that I used to work with in Berlin, and Luke was there. And Luke started talking to Reese, and then he said to come to the photography thing. So I went to that. That was very cool. I started doing loads. I went off on a crazy tangent and stopped working on what I was supposed to be doing after going that day. So that was fun. And then I met with Grace recently, and I'd like to do my PhD.
Excellent. Well done. Okay, now let me say that there is an award, a PhD award, that's ready in the offing. There's going to be 2 PhD awards at this place. One is an AHRC, and one is the Gertrude Aston Water. I never can say her name right. It's ASTON, right? No H.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since Matteo was awarded the AHRC, and Grace, Gertrude Water, can you just explain that so that people can hear? Because the deadline is the 12th of April. And anyone that's applying for funding, they need to get me their applications before, way before, I would say middle of March, if you can do it. So we can go through the applications, make sure they're.
I would go to do a PhD if I don't get it.
Yes.
Yeah, the Gertrude Aston I just did a kind of, it's 1,000 words that you have to write for the proposal, and you just mapped out your ideas and how it related to things that I was already kind of working on originally, and then developing it into, they were quite generalised aims looking back, but kind of areas that were related to it, and where I think I could start pulling out a question to do with kind of a more extended research project. And it asks you for a research context, and any questions that you might have at this stage, but linking with other previous experience, which was obviously for me was through my art practice, but if you've got kind of any written experience in this as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Hi. Here or here? Okay. You just want to stay back there, is that?
Wait, am I being invited to sit there?
You're either invited to sit there, or you know,
Right, okay.
on the couch or whatever. Okay, good. And can you say about the HRC? Wait, did you have any questions about that? Does anybody have any
Can you
questions about that?
tell me the name again?
Gertrude Aston Water.
And if you go on the research website, which is almost impossible to find, but if you basically, I'll send you the link. So anybody that's interested, ask me and I'll send, or Grace, can you send,
Yeah.
Are you guys gonna apply? Yeah, so definitely send them the link for this, because it has that one and it has the HRC. And,
The HRC is probably similar, and it's just, it is twisted a bit more towards an academic kind of research. So you need to have a fairly clear question to state, which they accept to develop over the research, and a contest for that, a context for that research.
as opposed to a content.
Yeah, I always get the 2 words wrong. And,
Small competition.
and then being able to outline, or generally, which kind of research methodology you're going to use, and what outcomes you expect from the research.
And how
The
do you,
game is about 1,000 words. There is an extensive description on how the field is probably 100 pages long, and it's all on the HRC website, which you can register with the university application page. It's a hideous process of self-marketing.
it's a hideous process of what?
Self-marketing.
It's true, probably.
But
Yes.
I need to rewrite it and hone it and refine it forever.
In fact, you're still doing that.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Any questions on the HRC or the
Do you
Gertrude?
have to apply each year, or once you've applied
No.
it, is it 3 years?
It's a 3-year. It's a 3-year plus 1, they call it, which means in your 4th year, they give you, I think they give you the tuition, which is called a write-up year here. And that means that whatever the tuition is, it's down to like £100 or £200 or something in the last year, something along those lines. And they think they cover that. Yeah, and they're very hard to get, and then they're going to go for them. There's going to be immense competition this year, but someone's got to get them. Might as well be you guys, you know. So, okay, so Barnaby.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry, I'm
Don't worry.
halfway through lunch.
That's right. Look here. Have
I
some.
know. They look marvellous.
This is from Iran. This is from Samira from Iran. Okay, can you just, we just went around the table, and this is Diane, she's new here, clearly. Can you just tell her and the group and the camera your life story?
I'm Barnaby Adams, and I'm currently engaged with Sandwich, but slightly less concretely. I'm pursuing an interest in George Bataille and the acoustic philosophy that is potentially expressed within his works.
So that's really, no
But
encephalitis?
Sandwich is more interesting.
Yeah, no encephalitis, no,
No, not this week.
not this week, no gastro
No,
problems with
no.
the time?
It's all in there.
Okay, great, yeah. Okay, great.
Vicissitudes.
The vicissitudes, absolutely. Okay, right, let's begin. So what we're doing the next run up until Easter is really having a very intense relationship, one to Heidegger as a founding platform, as it were, his work as a founding platform, to understand sort of what's at issue with the question of metaphysics and why it's so annoying or not annoying, why we're dealing with it. That's one sort of thread. The second thread is then moving to the question of identity and identity and difference, and understanding the words, the concept words, identity and difference, and why that it is problematized in questions of representation, how it is that so much of the current work of today relies on this particular Heideggerian move, which for reasons that are unclear to me are never really talked about. So in fact we get questions about postmodernism, or we get questions about I don't know what, but anyway, most of those positions have come from either Husserl, who's obviously sort of the grander founder of this move, but they were developed primarily in the context that are now being used today by Heidegger. And then of course they've been redeveloped and developed in all sorts of ways, you know, of everyone from Merleau-Ponty, Lyotard, Foucault, Derrida, I would say probably, I can't even think of her name now, it's really terrible. Well, certainly Irigaray and the Forgetting of Air, her work is dealing with this question. And you could even make the argument, partly because I don't want Barnaby to feel left out here, that Bataille's work is coming at these questions of the event, but in a totally different way. The other thing I'd like to preface is to say that the first couple of weeks will therefore be on this question of identity and difference. We're going to be looking at the Fribourg lectures, Raymond and Fribourg lectures. Hopefully you have the book, I see. I'm just now printing off the identity and difference, which you can get on ARG. But if you don't have them uploaded, those pamphlets, the books seem to be back.
Yep.
So the question I have, because I've also uploaded mine in the file folders, did they also show up?
Yes.
So the file, is that what showed up?
There are two mirror folders, because I don't know what happened a while ago. And in one of the two folders, which is the one everybody uses, everything is appeared.
Okay.
And I moved it back from the mirror folder.
Oh, I
In the
see.
meantime, you uploaded in the mirror folder your collection with all the folders.
Right,
Which
okay.
is much better organized.
Thank you. That's small but not insignificant.
And now we've got two folders.
Okay, so get rid of the one that's not organized, since it's the same folder.
I have to see who is we chose 2 folders is connected to everyone.
Oh,
that's
I
the
see.
problem. That's why we've got 2 folders.
Oh, can't you just upload the can't you upload the, can't you just mirror that folder then?
I'll see what
Because it's just so easy to have like Foucault and Deleuze and whatever. You need to give Mattia your email so he can invite you into the Dropbox. Okay, between the two of you, I'm surrounded by bread. Okay, just want to
Not
mention.
bread. I can't eat bread.
I can't either eat bread. Ah, good. A gluten-free problem. Okay, so anyway, the idea is to then sort of mull over these questions the next couple of weeks, and then we'll move into, I believe we're moving into the time, I have it in front of me, where you're going to be giving a few discussions, with the idea that there's going to be this question of how energy gets established, how one understands concepts via their properties of, let's say, dynamism, dynamics. And somebody, maybe it was Lauren, mentioned the question of energy and economies of energy, economies of intensity, and so on. So we're going to move out of these very specific ways of understanding the concepts and sort of widen it into what now is understood as a postmodern paradigm, which is to say something that is not dealing with dialectics as such, though in between this we'll be having the Foucault seminars. Does anybody have a list? Actually, because I don't have it in front of me. Can you please pass me that list for a second? Thank you. And we'll pass you the list as well. So let me just make sure that this is clear. Thanks for thinking this up. So today is the 29th. It's the fundamental concepts of metaphysics, identity 1. Grace is to summarize Heidegger's principal identity, Paul Grace. Okay, and then we'll, there's also a little bit of the question concerning technology will come in there. And then the next one is on metaphysics, and Lauren, you'll be summarizing Mattia. Yeah, I see it now. And then we get into Barnaby's remarks on difference, because what he was proposing to do was not only look at the principles of difference in the second lecture of Heidegger's Identity and Difference, but also in the Bremen, and conceivably you'll bring in, I'm assuming you're going to bring in Bataille. Okay, you don't have to do that. Just keep eating. Clearly, the refueling is taking a while. Okay, that's fine, no problem. We'll just ignore him. Nobody stare at Barnaby when he eats. Okay, the other thing is we will then get, once again, get through the question of perdurance in difference. That'll be the the middle of February. By the end of February, Mattia will present on difference versus Derrida, the difference that we've been dealing with via Derrida. And then we'll move into economies of sexualities and eroticism and porn and the dream work and so on. And that'll be in March, basically. That'll be our March experience. And that'll go up until the spring break, and then we'll get into antimaterialisms. So I'll send that around. Okay. I mentioned at the outset of the first time that we were doing this, what was involved with the question concerning technology in terms of the question of techna and the standing reserve. And I'm just trying to remind you of this and what it means to have a standing reserve from the point of view of Heidegger, not from the point of view of Marx. I figured that it was important that we bring Marx here, so we have the importance of the poverty of philosophy, where he's yelling at people who only interpret the world. Anyway, and I just want to be clear, because I wasn't sure if I was that clear at the time before, and then I want to make sure that people have understood Marx, Mark as in that Mark, as opposed to Marx, as in that Marx, comments on metaphysics. So we're going to have a little bit of a knitting moment here, and then we'll move into this question concerning identity. What is the problem? Why is it a problem? What is the annoyance that Heidegger is raising? So, to be very clear about the question concerning technology as one of the basic texts that underpins a lot of what was going on in this seminar, there's a relational position that's being explored. And the idea is that the relation is what is giving meaning. So one has to get a sense of this question of the relation. And does the relation get established by endpoints? Or does the relation get established by fields that have edges or don't have edges? These are two very different ways of understanding the, I can see that being a problem. These are just different ways of understanding the ways in which a method can speak to how one comes to understand what's sitting in front of you. A small comment on the word method. A method in this course, or in the PhD, or in the PhD according to this university and all universities, according to the Grand Buba here, is the path. It's the path on which you are able to grab and understand things, or not grab and not understand them. The method is what allows you to get your filters on in such a way that you are filtering one way or the other, how you think, oh, I'll take this, not that. That every way in which you grasp something has a method to it. I mean, pardon me, it's not that every way has its own method. There is various ways around which the systems of logic are established in such a way that some things get blinded and some things get observed because of the way in which you're on the path. And last semester we were really looking at the dialectical path. This semester we're really trying to look at the ways in which a kind of imminent plateaus get established. And these plateaus are what we're talking about in terms of this relational environment. So what Heidegger does in the question concerning technology is that he basically says what's interesting about this time period is that it is predominantly ruled by techna, the logic of techna, the logic of how to grasp, G-R-A-S-P, grasp something. Not grasp it, I can't pronounce that P, grasp something. And that the way in which it's grasped is its art. There's an art to that. There's a technique to it. And the technique is not a craft. So it doesn't mean it I mean, it might imply a craft, it might imply that you have to be good at what you're doing, but there's something else that goes into this grasping. Now, someone like Bataille, Freud, Lyotard, Foucault, and Derrida, most of the other people are going to mention that what's included in that grasp, of course, clearly the Frankfurt School as well, is sexuality, is the sexual. There's something that makes something can't have the art unless it has some kind of relationship to eroticism or the sensual or something. We've got to get that into the ball game somehow. So what he basically says in the question concerning technology is, first of all, it's not about the actual forms of technology, although clearly the actual forms of technology matter. The second thing he mentions is that this way in which the techna gets established is through what he will call enframing. And you've all read this, so I'm just giving you a summary of this because I want to just skip over this till we get to the, so we can put Grace into the spotlight here. And the way in which something is grasped forms what he's going to call an enframing. It forms the parameters, except they're not parameters as such. They don't have edges. They're kind of like this. They're kind of like this mad thing here. So this forms parameters in part because of the way it just ends. That's its parameter. It's enframed, but the what's sort of inside this bit is gathered together. Let's say the gathering creates this mass. It's not that there was a box and we put it on, although technically with respect to this particular example there was a box and it was put on, but anyway, the idea is that this has been grasped like a cloud, and this is what forms the edges. So it's the enframing of the techna is what is creating this thing. So the logic of techna is that it, first of all, somehow, and that's the question we're going to look at with identity and difference, somehow it creates this way of making something coalesce, cohere, become coherent. Secondly, that which is not included in the coherent making of the inframing is what he calls standing reserve. And this is what I want to be clear about with respect to that versus Marx's notion of the standing reserve army of labor. In Marx's argument, the reserve army of labor, what he suggests, and he's not incorrect about this, is that capital and capitalism tries to, people that are involved in industry forms of capitalism, try to make it so that they can squeeze out the most amount of profit with the least amount of expenditure. So a person who comes in, a workforce, basically has to somehow yield a profit to their work. Otherwise, they're not profitable. It's not worth keeping them in the labor force. Now, if you know, people had their way, as Marx argues in Das Kapital, then the capital would squeeze you as hard as possible. And unless there were a union or something else that would stop that, that would just be how it would be. And if you dropped dead or you said no, there'd be a zillion people to take your place. And that's the standing reserve army. That's like an army of people saying, okay, you might be tired, but I'm not tired, I'm starving. I want your job. So as a result, you're forced to stay in this job, crummy job, because if you don't stay in the job, there'll be nothing else. You will go over the cliff, and somebody else will take your place. That's a different form of the standing reserve than what the reserve army of labor is different than the standing reserve of Heidegger. Heidegger's standing reserve is kind of similar, but not exactly, in the sense that anything could have been brought into this cloud, as it were, this techna, but it wasn't. And so it's not so much what's left out, but it's what is laying around that could also be brought in. It's kind of it's kind of the ghost of the inframing. So it exists in a kind of latent level. So I need you to get it. Are you finding that on the page? Can you find that? Yeah, the standing reserve.
It sounds far more economical in terms of economics, the version of Heidegger than one of Marx.
What do you mean it sounds more economical?
It's an intuition, I can't actually think, but there is the element of potential of being remembered, being consumed. I believe that consuming appears once in the percentage of the technology as the use of what is reserved.
Yeah, use value in that sense, yeah.
It is the fact that there is already a parameter or paradigm, which is the inframing, that is able to convert whatever, and when I say whatever, it's not a sloppy term, but anything, into the code of the system. But there is a code in place, able to translate what remains into what has been captured.
Right.
And this to me responds much more to capital as it is now than the much more simplistic Marx is much broader than this, and I don't know well enough to engage. But in this specific case, the standing reserve of the army of labor is a much more petty problem than a standing reserve at the German times, it seems.
I'm going to put that on hold because we're not reading Das Kapital right now, and so I'm not bringing in that argument as fully as it could be brought in. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, although it could very well be, it's either Volume 1, Chapter 25 or Volume 1, Chapter 26, where he gets into the whole question of standing reserve, the reserve army of labor. But also in the Grundrisse, there's a section on what is political economy, and he also gets into, it's a very short, it's only like 3 pages, the method of political economy, and he gets into that, which is worth We can look at that later, but since you haven't read it yet. Do you mind if we put that on hold?
Mhm.
Did you find it, Mark?
Yeah, page
Yeah.
17.
70?
17.
17. Can you share with Tim? Okay, yeah. Yeah, go on. Can you read it?
Me?
Yeah.
Right, from the top.
Mhm.
What kind of unconcealment is this? Okay, that is peculiar to that which comes to stand fall through is setting upon that challenges. Everywhere, everything is ordered to stand by, to be immediately at hand. Indeed, to stand there just so that it may be called on for a further ordering. Whatever is ordered about in this way has its own standing. We call it standing reserve. The word expresses here something more and something more essential than mere stock. The name standing reserve assumes the rank of an inclusive rubric. It designates nothing less than the way in which everything presence is that is wrought upon by the challenging revealing. Whatever stands by in the sense of standing reserve no longer stands over against us as object. There's an airliner that stands on the runway.
It's rough. It's in the wrong
Yes.
spot.
An airline that stands on the runway is surely an object, certainly, but we can represent the machine so. But then it conceals itself as to what and how it is. Revealed, it stands on the taxi strip only as standing reserve, inasmuch as it is ordered to ensure the possibility of transportation. For this, it must be in its whole structure and in every one of its constituent parts, on call for duty, i.e. ready for takeoff. Here it would be appropriate to discuss Hegel's definition of the machine as an autonomous tool. When applied to the tools of the craftsman, its characterization is correct. Characterized in this way,
Just a little stab
however,
at Hegel.
the machine is not thought at all from out of the essence of technology within which it belongs. Seen in terms of the standing reserve, the machine is completely autonomous, for it has its standing only from the ordering of the orderable. The fact that now, wherever we try to point to modern technology as the challenging revealing, the words setting upon, ordering, standing reserve obtrude and accumulate in a dry, monotonous, and therefore oppressive way, has its basis in what is now coming to utterance.
Just one little bit more and then.
Who accomplishes the challenging setting upon through which what we call the real is revealed as standing reserve? Obviously man. To what extent is man capable of such a revealing? Man can indeed conceive, fashion and carry through this or that in one way or another, but man does not have control over unconcealment itself, in which at any given time the real shows itself or withdraws. The fact that the real has been showing itself in the light of ideas ever since the time of Plato did not bring about. The thinker only responded to what addressed itself to him.
Okay, so what have you heard?
That there's a problem with this standing reserve and the notion of truth, which for Heidegger is acts as concealed. And in this selection of, well, first of all, the enframement, the thing which isn't inframed, the standing reserve, is placed into a relation with the standing reserve. So whereas the standing reserve is placed in relation to that which is inframed,
Right.
which it is not, but is forced into a relationship by the selection of the curator or man.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, come on in. Ah, come on.
However, this is this revealing, as in the kind of as in the sort of the curatorial thematization of these two relations forms a retreat from the truth, which is that which is unconcealed in Heidegger's thought.
Okay, let's start that again because we had a small secret. That's all right. Diane, Giancarlo, Diane. Okay, good. Now we know everybody. Okay, so we're just doing the summary of Heidegger and we're moving into identity and difference. Can you just state what we just looked at is the relationship, or that there is a relationship that needs to be understood between an enframing, a field as it were. Later on we'll talk about it as plateaus or planes of immanence. Anyway, this enframing thing. And that which is not enframed, that which is caught outside of the enframing, it's caught outside. It has to be very clear that there's not a line, it's not like a deep cut, that you have that which is in the field and that which isn't in the field. It's not a dialectic, it's not a contradiction in that sense. The standing reserve acts very differently than that. It's forced into a relationship to the enframing environment, but that so it has some kind of value. So now you want to just explain what you were saying, because it then has something to do with truth, and later on we'll see aesthetics go on.
Yeah. So the problem with what's contained in the standing reserve, which is implicated in the relationship with that which is inframed, is that it has now by this relationship, which the person writing that calls the inclusive rubric, it's been revealed.
The person writing that?
Yeah, was that not Heidegger?
Yes.
That was Heidegger. I thought that was from the introduction.
No, it's Heidegger.
Oh, that was Heidegger. Right. Okay. I thought you said he's having a dig at Heidegger.
No, he's having a dig at Hegel.
He's having a dig at Hegel. Right. Okay. Sorry. So what Heidegger calls the... I know, there's plenty of fat coming my way. So what Heidegger calls the inclusive rubric, by being included in the general reserve, there is a revealing, or rather an unconcealing, and in that act of unconcealing, which is part of the kind of curatorship of the human who's making the decisions, there's a retreat from the notion of Heideggerian truth, which can only be concealed.
He's now said it twice, but I have the feeling, looking at people's faces, that you haven't heard it yet.
I haven't heard it yet. I do. I'm kind of like the standing reserve. So when it's outside the thing, it's like a membrane. Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. A membrane.
Is that
possible?
So okay?
It's not.
But then I don't know what inclusive.
But it's not really a membrane, because that implies kind of an organic relationship that involves yet another layer.
It had a relationship to it.
Has a relationship.
Outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Shall I have another go?
Yeah, have one more
All right,
go.
one more go. I'll say it in a different way.
Okay.
So let's take the example of the airliner, all right, which is a machine, a tool in the thing. But say I want to talk about available passenger seats on the flight to Berlin, some of which are on the aircraft there. So or not on the aircraft, they're available passenger seats, but they're going to Frankfurt. So I've decided my enframing is I want to talk about refer to available passenger seats on the flight to Berlin. As such, I've included the passenger seats on the jet, but not the jet itself. I'm talking about an entirely different economy. So I've both implicated part of the jet, but it doesn't have any kind of relation to what Heidegger's just talking about, which is a big tool. So I've built, I think it's quite an easy, I'm talking about this set, but I'm implicating this set. So that's seats, free seats to Berlin. That's all seats which could be sent to Berlin, potentially, but they're not, they're going somewhere else.
Okay.
And I've implicated all this area by referring to this. Now this is no longer a plane or a tool, it's something else entirely, because I've chosen to talk about seats to Berlin.
Okay, so you're looking, and how they're related is because you're talking about seats.
Yeah, and I've changed the plane from Heidegger's tool there to just a bunch of seats. But I've done that because I've chosen to talk about something else, and I've chosen to talk about seats to Berlin.
And then you set up an internet EasyJet.
Yeah, but the seats, the whole idea of seats on the plane, I mean, I've just changed Heidegger's plane to a bunch of seats, but in doing so, I've retreated from the truth rather than actually revealed it. I haven't revealed seats on the plane or revealed it not to be a tool at all. I've just slightly altered the meaning because I picked on something else. But for Heidegger, the fact even he's retreating from the truth, because it's not actually a plane. And once it's named and revealed or unconcealed.
Okay, so it's a way of looking at things rather than, and that's the analogy, is the plane and that bit you can do, apply it to all kinds of information.
Yeah, but the truth, as they say, is sort of out there and isn't in the, when he says, Heidegger says, hey, it's a plane, he's not telling you something
that you need
that
to know.
you need to know. He's defacing something, if you like. He's defacing the truth, retreating from it.
Okay.
Because the truth is, it must be, according to him, should be hidden or is hidden.
Mattia, what were you going to say?
Well, it's several things. Firstly, is that my understanding of this specific point is that nothing remains out of the framing. But as soon as the logic of consumption or implementability in consumption, or a logic that can translate anything into the framing, as soon as this logic is set up, then everything is captured. And this is why he's saying he's writing that the logic of technology is the logic of the contemporary world.
Yes.
Nothing remains out.
So in that sense, it's very much like the network, just to make it sort of flat and maybe more graspable, in the sense that there's not like different highways and byways that you get on in order to find something in the network as such. If you're, it is true if you're using apps. This was the big fight between the web versus the internet. For those of you that keep up with these kind of things. So if you're interested in Web 2.0, or wherever they're at now at this point with the numbering system, the web allowed for this kind of random choosing, whereas apps create silos, create actual highways, as it were, and therefore it retrains people back into a corporatist headspace. But what he's saying is that the time period at the moment creates this kind of amorphous environment of which you could put a little framing around something, but that's because you're choosing to put an framing around it, but that's not why it sticks together. Just because you want it to stick together isn't why it's going to cohere, and that becomes the next problem.
But something escapes me then, because I would emphasize the economic, not economic as in monetary, but the economic as in system element of the argument, and think that what is putting forward is that something that has or is supposed to have a more original standing is covered because it is taken into our daylight, into our views, in terms of standing reserve, in terms of something that is consumable a way or another, something that can be appropriated as an object in front of a subject, rather than in a relationship to it. So this means that nothing remains out, whether it is, almost the example he makes of the airplane makes no sense because the airplane is already designed and planned in terms of being standing reserve. But it is so original, the concealment of the real.
It's not really original, it's onto.
Yes, it's not the chronological beginning, nor logical beginning. It's the, I would call it the another dimension, is the opposite of what we see, but it's not an opposite because there is no mold of its opposite. And this is why it is this funny game of revealing, concealing. When one realizes that something is hidden, one is actually seeing the truth. But this is not a negative, positive game.
Well, that's the main. Let's just leave it there for the time being. The main point about this is that it's not a contradictory relationship, plus minus, which taken together creates a whole field. It is. It's like trying to get a sense of how vectors exist, or how different. What's the mathematical askew? When things are askew as opposed to contradictory or right angles, they're going like sort of like so, oblique. Yeah, they're oblique, and that's what he's getting at here. The oblique angle, as it were, of how something gets made into a coherent whole. Okay, so so I'm gonna leave this with, no, I'm not gonna do it.
Is it something sorry,
Okay.
I was thinking of the problem of quantum physics where one can either point at the position of a particle or at the speed of a particle, but never both together. And the utopia that Heidegger has is to be able to find a position in equilibrium in between the two. But that's impossible, so there is this constant decaying in one or the other position.
But it's not impossible because it's impossible in quantum physics.
And it's impossible because it's impossible logically and ontologically.
But the reason it's impossible logically and ontologically is because what he's saying is that the question of the truth itself is no itself. It's always withdrawing. It's always withdrawing from its present. Now, you might want to argue that question, but he's making this sentence. So, in terms of Grace's work, for example, in Supernatural, a lot of this could filter into the hauntology, all the work that you find, not all the work, but a lot of work in the literature on hauntology, the logic of the haunt, of the haunting of this escaping truth, doesn't make it less true. It only makes it quasi-real, which is slightly different. So there's a different play of the game going on. So anyway, what I want to do is draw your attention in order to situate what we're really talking about today's seminar. Just draw your attention to the problem of techna, and keep reading this, and also William Levitt's intro to this is actually quite good. Normally I don't suggest reading secondary sources, but he's very good at what he's saying here, just like Joan Stambaugh in the Identity Difference is very good. So in this book, in Question Concerning Technology, and think very carefully on the question of techna, on what is techna. I mean, he goes in, he's really quite, I don't know if he's a bad writer because I can't read his German, or if it's bad translation, but, or if he's just, whatever. But I think the way in which he develops his argument and these really pathetic, the Smiths, the different, the silver and the gold and whatever, it's never worked for me. But, just still try and read the relationship, read in what it means to have a techna. Think about why is he suggesting that this is a predominantly main way of adhering to reality in this time period. And he's not saying it in a linear sense, because he's saying there are other time periods that were also like this. Hence Lyotard's argument that postmodernism doesn't necessarily happen after modernism. It happened parallel to modernism, before modernism, right now, whatever. I mean, so you can see where he's coming from. Heidegger is also saying this question concerning technology isn't simply about the 21st century's use of airplanes or whatever, but when societies are able to organize around techna, something happens, and the happening is that a standing reserve in relationship to enframing gets established. And he's making that as an ontological claim.
Can it be said that language is one of the primary which enframes?
Yeah, it could be said that. Do you want to say it more strongly? No.
Yes. When I say language, well, it is language as in the words and the grammar and the discourse in that sense, which we were looking at in the BIAD before Christmas. And particularly the idea that language can say everything, not anything, but can name everything, whether they are objects, situations, so it can, or concepts, so it can explain. Therefore, language is, if it isn't the truth, it is a privilege, a tool and position of the truth, which always organize a hierarchy, because everything can be translated into language, and language will have access
But
to
not
it.
everything can be translated into language.
Precisely.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
I took the bait, yes. so what do we do with that?
That's a technical form from framing that creates a distribution of our...
Oh, I see, and that's why you're talking about
yeah,
language.
yeah.
Because language appears as though it can do the whole game.
But it is also actively enforced as such often.
I mean, the difference being, just to be careful, the difference is that Heidegger is going to suggest ways of having authentic relationships to truth, and that it will have some form of historical dimension to it, or materiality to it, that the way in which you're posing language sounds much more speculative than he would be suggesting.
But at the same time, he proposes, it's very ambiguous because at times he says that language is a house of being, so it is in language that we see the truth. Then he says that it is poetry, not all language. Then at other times he says it is art beyond poetry, like the essay on the boots of painted by Van Gogh. So it goes into a visual environment. But then the way he develops his argument is completely poetic.
Yes, but we're going to get back to that. Just, in fact, that's a good point to make my little transition over to identity and difference. So note that Mattia ended up on the question of the poetic, as it were. To think this maybe visually in your head, the idea is that a concept, a fully formed environment of meaning. We know that in the dialectic, in ways of thinking through in dialectics, the concept, the meaning of the concept escapes the ceiling of the concept. So the concept, to follow Adorno on this in negative dialectics, there's always something left over. There's always you can't, the object always escapes its concept somehow. It's almost like putting, a cookie cutter around dough. There's stuff that slips away. Now, what Heidegger wants to say is that this is very important to understand, especially since he's trying to get away from the famous dialectical issue. And he's trying to get away from the famous dialectical issues because of this question of metaphysics, which we'll go back to Mark to make a quick summary of again. But when he gets into identity and difference, his major critique starts off with Hegel. And it starts off with Hegel because he's arguing that Hegel is not able to bring in this kind of sensoriness to this kind of poetic that we're trying to flesh out now. We're trying to set, we talked about in terms of standing reserve and this very gentle way of doing this before we get into the kind of heavy tennis match grand slam kind of arguments that we're going to move into pretty quickly. Before we do that, Mark, can you just summarize then this antagonism he's having with the question of metaphysics?
Yeah, can I just say something else?
Yeah.
I want to say this how this tries to fit together. In this one, the leap out of metaphysics into
identity and difference.
to event appropriation. Or a more, it can be a leap out of technology into a more appropriate technology. But techno is a revealing of beings in their being, kind of language you use it.
Yeah.
But that of leap out of one kind of technology into the modern kind of technology, which is this standing reserve kind.
Yeah.
Can lead to a ruin, or it is a ruin. It will be a ruin, because the technology that he's talking about here, the standing reserve kind of stuff, in the Rhine and the coal fields and stuff, is about using up your energy.
Yes.
It's not converting and changing as in the windmills and the other kind of technology he talks about prior.
Yeah.
So the leap out of one kind of technology into a more appropriate technology, or the technology where we are now, and that's how we have to deal with it. We can't step outside of that. We can't go back to anything else. He's going to push somewhere down the line to these ideas he talked about transcendence, which is going to end up on the kind of ruin. But that's my understanding of that kind of thing. It's my way, my direction of travel when I leave here. That's where I'm going to be looking at. The question about metaphysics that say is antagonism. If metaphysics deals with beings as beings, and mistakenly deals with being as being, I mean the question, the relation with Hegel that you brought up there, the relationship with Hegel. If Hegel is concerned with the absolute idea and the movement towards the absolute idea, absolute knowledge, and how does that square with these ideas of the standing reserve. Was that the idea, that everything will be used up, everything will be emptied out?
No.
No, that's not. It's obviously not. So obviously somehow the slice doesn't work with the whole Hegelian, the whole history of Western metaphysics. This mistake that comes in, as it were, the trivialization we talked about, the confusion and the unproblematic nature. The trivialization is where it kind of anthropomorphizes being into a being, so it takes away the existential angst of not knowing, nothingness of being, and makes it into a person. That's what he's saying when you mistake being for being, a being for a being. So that's the kind of anthropomorphologization. He wants a more originally understanding of being, which means going back and looking at being, shorn of these accretions that come in with the scholasticism, and I don't.
And then
I
that
don't
kind of
mean
being,
literally
no.
get out of it. I mean,
But then that kind of being, which would then foreground, or anyway, invite a different kind of notion of identity.
Yeah.
Over to you, Grace.
Yeah.
Okay, so this different, so that's what you need to get a sense of. So the attack on metaphysics, basically, I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, Marcus said it very well at the whole seminar last week, and also we'll keep bringing this up. But the attack is that it is foreclosing the sensuousness of reality and the sort of the complexities of reality, because it's too complex. It's one of those kind of
That's what he says, the confusion. It confuses the suprasensuous world and the non-sensuous world of difference and the intelligible world, and foregrounds those as opposed to the sensuous.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying that, in fact, the sensuous, it not only does it need to be foreground, but the problem with foregrounding it is that it always then falls back to a question of experience or the body in a way that is temporally compromised. And so he can't, so what he's trying to solve is how can you make the senses have a logic? This is where Deleuze picks up on this.
Yeah, but these statistics is sort of like missing the kind of...
He's what?
Well, he's sort of missing the materialism in the sort of complexity science to then the exact science, sort of the scientific, sort of the traditional scientific method. It's not like contemporary.
And how is he missing it? I mean, how do you mean that?
Well, like in terms of Delanda, his ontology is the ontology of event, and so that captures the sort of more radical kind of emergence that Heidegger is speaking about. But
Delanda captures a more radical emergence that
Yes.
Heidegger would like to be speaking about, but isn't.
Well,
Or are you
he's
saying that he is speaking about it?
He's like he's what remains in concealment of that kind of truth. I think he's trying to get at that kind of event.
And what is that kind of event? Just so everybody's on the same page here. No, you're right. It's just what is the event that he's basically trying to speak about?
It's. Oh, I'm not sure what to say now.
Okay, Grace. We'll just moving right along then, because that's the key here. when you remember it, don't hold back. Okay.
Okay.
So how did you understand the this thing? How did it fall for you? How did it?
Well, could I just go from the start of how I unravelled it?
Yes, unless did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask Mark, when you say that Heidegger confuses Hegel's being with beings,
It's confusing. That's what
He's claiming that others do.
how he's claiming others do.
Yeah,
I mean, is that the prising open of the concept by anthropomorphizing it?
Yes.
Yeah, so the original relation to being, he was saying, was open to being. And that brings in that whole sense of existence. Why anything? Those kind of questions you have as a kid. Suddenly,
Not just as a kid.
well, yes, exactly. To suddenly to have an answer with Aquinas, it's God, and that kind of thing, it's God. It closes down, it makes it manageable. What many people, we always try to make unify and make easy. So he's saying, well, that's a trivialization of the question. The confusion is the going beyond the suprasensible and and they're non-sexual, and the forgetting, the unproblematic nation is forgetting that being a being as a difference from beings. So the confusion of metaphysics is being of beings as beings, as it were. So it comes back to us, it's all our doing, as it ends up in idealism, kind of idealism.
And it's not about us?
Well,
it's about me,
so to jump from there, I'll finish with you now. Let's go to the technology thing. I think when you were talking about Cynthia, you were trying to uncover what is covered, maybe, in the technology, which is that danger, a sense of danger, you know, this the unknown. The man says, oh yes, it's perfectly, you know, we're in control, like with the economics and the whole crash. We know, we got the maths, we got the numbers, it's all under control. Don't panic. Well, how went wrong, you know. So there's that kind of revealing concealed going on in the technology.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
There we go.
That's good. Any other questions before Grace? Dane, did you have a question? Okay. Okay, I have printed off half of a copy, which everybody can sort of take a look at. You guys can share because oh, you have the book there, great. And do you have a copy? Okay, why don't I have that? Get Andy that, please. Great. Okay, good. Excellent. Ready?
So Heidegger it begins kind of in the introduction, James Stambaugh picks up that identity, it's always been an issue within philosophy since Parmenides, who's a Greek philosopher, Parmenides India, is it?
Good.
Yeah.
And what's the story with Parmenides? What was his thing? Do you know?
Yes.
Just hit him.
It's one of the very early philosophers. He belongs to what is called pre-Socrates, before Socrates, and it's important, especially for Heidegger, because metaphysics hasn't yet been set upon them there. And
because I don't think people heard you say that.
Metaphysics didn't yet take over as a concept, I think, probably.
Which is why, just as a sub-point to your point, it's why a lot of people go to the pre-Socratics, because they're trying to get out of metaphysics, and part of the argument goes, well, maybe you can get out of metaphysics by going before it even got started. That kind of argument may not work.
And what the interesting bit is that Parmenides, a great philosopher of the origin of philosophies, there are two lines left. So he might have written about football for what you know, but there are these two things only which have been interpreted over and over and over and over forever. And one is that being is, and you assume there is no sense of speech of non-being or anything else. And the other one is that being.
Wait, say that again. One is?
Being is.
That's it.
That's it. And the other one is.
And in fact, actually, there's an entire thing. Being is,
yes.
You know, Ronald Reagan.
And the other one is being and thought are the same, are one. Then it is opposed, just to clarify, to Heraclitus, which I think so.
To
Heraclitus.
Heraclitus, for those of you that say it slightly differently.
Who said instead, everything is becoming. Nothing is static, because being was seen as completely static, solid, monolithic. And Heraclitus instead saw things as in constant flow.
And Heraclitus is kind of like the daddy of dialectics.
In a way, yes.
Yes.
And I also like that. Yeah.
Yes, he is the father of dialectics. His first toe in the water was the beginning of trying to understand how this becoming could be associated to synthesis, antithesis, you know, whatever. Anyway, go on. It's very good.
And from the debate between the two came the famous paradoxes of Zeno of Elea, which was on the side of Parmenides. So it was for the solidity and consistency and complete immanence of being.
Which is a kind of interesting way of understanding consistency.
Yes.
And also opaqueness.
Yes.
Because consistency, the fact that something's not static, the fact that something is static implies that it's opaque in a certain sense, that it's got a presence. But this presence was immanence.
Yes, and there was also something to the Parmenidean angle. It was undividable. So, for example, the paradoxes were that if you could divide being, if things would move, then if you can divide being and I am launching an arrow at you, before reaching you it has to reach halfway, before reaching halfway it has to reach halfway of the halfway quarter, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, and then a 32nd, and 64th, and you would have to be killed by the arrow. Which
So
is
you can see how that's wrong.
or the Achilles running against the turtle, and the turtle winning over the fast man. All these absurdities.
So that's Zeno's paradox.
Yes,
So
if you can divide being,
Z-E-N-O.
then everything falls apart according to that. So that's
Okay, but what was his? That was quite good. But what? And it was very good about the pre-Socratics. But what exactly did Parmenides? What is the thing that?
Thinking and being belong together in the same.
That what?
Yeah.
Thinking and being belong together in the same.
And there's another aspect to it. It has to do with speaking. And this is very important. I don't know if I assume that he gets into it here, but anyway, just put that down because the question, what comes first? And it's not like the chicken or the egg, but what comes first? The word, the text, or the spoken word. And there's a long and torturous route where basically you would say that the Derridian move is to say the text comes before the word, so it's an attack on Parmenides' position. Whereas Foucault is making the argument around the orality comes first. By orality doesn't necessarily mean language in terms of actual communicating. It's this kind of standing reserve thing.
Sorry, you said Derrida. What was
Derrida
that
is
one?
the text.
What, Foucault. Yeah,
Foucault.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's sentence 2 of your presentation.
But
Okay.
then Leopold says, well, the line under that is so it's
Yes. So he's like the really good graduate student you want to pat on the head. Very good. Yes, they're both good. They're both right. Yeah, go on.
So Parmenides, he states that identity is thought and being are one and the same, which is what we've just spoken about. But so Heidegger points out that Parmenides, being from the point of view of identity, is a characteristic of identity. But then metaphysics comes along and instead represents identity as a characteristic of big B being. So then in Western philosophy,
And what is this big B being?
it's the thing, the out there, the being there of being. So there's us, which are humans, and then you have like a projection of possibilities. That's how I understood it.
Okay.
Which I think we also
The Dasein.
yeah,
Dasein.
Dasein.
D-A-S-E-I-N.
So in Western philosophy, identity is thought as this unity, so the unity of a thing with itself, which I don't know whether that's what you said when you were saying anthropomorphizing the being and the being, so you're bringing them together and that they can
Into the big ego I.
yeah, into the self. So it kind of develops in the introduction, and it talks about how Nicholas Cusa takes up the argument that identity is not the unity of beings, but instead the relation of God to the world, so of the infinite, which would be God, and the finite, which is us as human beings.
Do you ever, just as a parenthesis, it's hard to interrupt, but do you ever wonder what these people wore? You know, they end up having these things like Nicola, whatever, you know, and as though this is like supposed to be crucial. So it seems to me that then one has to think, what were they wearing when did they have a little toga on, and you know, what did they have, like, you know, little hats on and stuff like that? Do you ever think about that? Does anybody ever wonder about that?
black gown.
Gown.
A black gown.
A black gown.
Yeah, it was a monk in Germany, 14th century, 15th century. Black gown.
It wasn't 14th century.
Nicola Cusa, yes.
Was it 14th century? I thought it was much earlier than that.
Cusa.
George Bataille says that what is not the actual start of identity isn't the skin that's irrelevant, or the kind of exterior kind of parts of the body, but the clothes that you're wearing.
Absolutely,
And
that's
it's
why
when you take off your clothes, then you cease to kind of experience finitude.
Thank you.
No, just thought I'd drop that in. totally relevant, really.
Okay, go on. Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought we should also be conscious about the fact they're actually humans that are coming up with these things.
So he defines that everything can be within reference to itself, so it's having a self-identity, and the way that negates any kind of otherness. But that God is a non-other. He states that nothing other than himself as nothing other than the world. So God is, I understand that as God is the infinite, so he can't be established as anything exact. Is that right?
Keep going.
But Heidegger sounds like he's quite annoyed with this and says that it's taken 2,000 years just to formulate identity as this kind of
And they still get it wrong. Luckily I'm here to fix it.
So then through German idealists, like we were talking about Hegel, but
Hegel.
Hegel, sorry. And he also talks about Fichte and Schelling. Fichte.
And Schelling, yeah.
And the fact that identity is placed at the centre of their argument, and that as thinkers, they're interested in how there's a mediation and a synthesis between subject and object. So for the German idealists, they take Parmenides' argument that thought and being are the same, and kind of translate this into being is thought, which is Hegel's.
Hegel.
Hegel.
Just pretend it's spelled H-A-Y.
Hegel. Hegel's absolute idea. So then it kind of continues, and the closest the closest person to Heidegger's development is Schelling, because in Of Human Freedom he problematises the fact that there must have been a being before there was a ground. So before all existence there must have been something before that to kind of give this ground. That's how I read it. On page 11 he states that since this being proceeds...
Page 11. Page 11 is Stambaugh making this comment. Okay, that's right.
Since this being precedes all antithesis, it cannot constitute their identity.
Wait, I can't find it. It's page 11?
Where on the page?
Mine's a PDF, so I'm not sure.
It's probably, it's PDF, it's probably...
oh, it's on page 10, just the bottom
10,
page.
okay, sorry. Oh, yeah, okay.
The bottom of page 10.
Yep.
So, since this being precedes all antitheses, it cannot constitute their identity. It can only be absolute indifference of both. Indifference is not a product of antithesis, nor are antitheses implicitly contained in it. It is as far rather a unique being apart from all antithesis. It is groundless. So essentially there's no grounding to it now, there's nothing that is kind of a foundation to it. So Heidegger takes this as a problem of identity outside of metaphysics, and states that it is identical, i.e. big B being and man, and that they can only be thought from the nature of identity itself. So you're from the point of view of your own identity, looking at how your relationship to you and big B being, and that you are essentially identical in that way. Or
You're drawn together.
Yeah, there's a relation between the two.
Which is important, because the equal sign for Heidegger is going to start playing with it. And rather than meaning it in a mathematical, literal sense, A is A, he's going to say A belongs to A. One belongs to Dasein. Dasein belongs to you. You're brought together like this. This is this movement. And this is what begins the enframing. So go on.
So Heidegger starts to question identity as thinking, because he doesn't agree with the fact that identity is this thinking. And he comes up with the principle of identity. So he states that every being as such belongs to an identity, which is the unity with itself. And that has to be a fundamental characteristic of big B beings, of beings. So he takes Parmenides again, being and thought are the same. And instead of having A equals A, he makes A is A, and the fact that they belong together, and the is what is the belonging. So being belongs together with thought into the same. So he kind of re-establishes the statement that Parmenides makes and then develops it outwards.
Let's just stay with that for a second. So the is, without using the word is too many times in one sentence, the is what? What does it look like in your mind?
It's the belonging together of the two. So it's the kind of the pulling, the grasping that brings them together.
So the is the enframing.
Yeah, the pulling, the coherence, or what makes it.
Everybody agree with that? Okay. It's not quite right, but,
No.
but that's right. We'll just let it lie there for a second. It's not wrong, but it's not quite right yet, but we'll get there. Yeah, go on.
So
This is
he
very
states
good.
that well, Heidegger believes that the is the relation of this belonging together of identity. And he kind of reinforces that identity is this relation, and the relation itself is something that is more original than what is related. And that's kind of a new way of thinking. Heidegger kind of says that he demands you to think that this relationship between this belonging together of identity, it has to be more original than what you think needs to be related. I haven't explained that very well, but it hopefully will be clear.
Can I just jump in for a second? The is that he's talking about here, the belonging is what he's saying, or is translated as a transitive. That is to say, it creates movement. It is naming a moving moment. So he's also enlivening, as it were, Parmenides, who is into the static moment. And he's basically saying that this is as a transitive. That's the key here for this. Now, that's point one. Point two is the notion of original. Just be careful when you use that word, or when Heidegger uses that word, to not think he means unique. He means he means that which can get something created. It's an original. It's origining it.
It's like he uses originary.
Originary, yeah, that's a better translation.
Pre-originary.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps even better.
Yeah. Okay, you're doing well with these now. Coming to life. Done.
Well, they're not.
That's right. Excellent.
Would it be right to say that the first level of understanding of the is, which could be said to be language,
Could be what?
could be said to be language
Right.
in this instance, the one he'd like to move away from is one that by naming puts up or creates a barrier, something that cannot be, something that stays in between us who speak, who name, who point, and the thing itself, the being and the capital B, the essence. There is, I don't remember if it's Heidegger or Lucy Rigaray who speaks of proximity being precisely the problem. One is so up close to something that can actually not see.
That's also part of critical theory. The whole idea of critical theory is that one has to have a critical distance.
But in this case, the critical distance is finding that one should not trust the naming and finding the relationship.
Yeah.
So it's a critical distance, even not in terms of having a broader view.
You're right.
But to open up to a much more difficult term here, much more original or pure relationship with being, which metaphysics and the old Western culture has covered up. So opening up to the revealing,
Yes.
and letting the concealing technology, language, thought, and metaphysics silence for a while, rest, so that the rest can speak.
Be heard.
Yeah, be heard, exactly.
Yeah.
So we were discussing it last week about the fact that most terms are passive. There is no action in Heidegger proposal. One needs to open up, not actively dig to find something.
Yeah, there's no discovery in that
No,
sense.
no.
There's invention, but no discovery. But it is active. I wouldn't say it was passive.
Well, it's a funny form of activity because there is no seeking. One needs to be prepared to fail precisely in order to reach this elusive truth.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's continue with your.
So he picks up on the fact that this relation, you can never predict what's going to be related, so you can't predict what you're going to kind of be drawn to. And because he simply says, because we don't understand what man is, to say that the understanding of big B being is something that can be subjective is kind of idiotic, because if we don't understand or have a kind of foundation of understanding for ourselves, how can we suddenly be at the centre of this kind of unknown drawing in? Which brings in the idea of man is the there of being there, which is the Dasein that we were just kind of saying. So then he develops on to saying that identity is this belonging together, and he does a play on the words of belonging together in terms of that you can kind of accentuate the belonging or you can accentuate the together. So in metaphysics it would be, it's the highlighting of the together, that's how I understood it. And to highlight the together kind of goes back to Thomas Aquinas and establishing God as the ground or the highest kind of being. But Heidegger wants to bring in this, the play on the belonging of the belonging together, which means that it brings thinking and being, they're held apart, so that they're kept separate, but they are also brought together in what he kind of talks about as the same. And this is what requires this leap outside of, out of metaphysics and kind of previous understandings of it. So Heidegger says that thinking is that which man is. So, but when he says thinking, he doesn't just mean kind of logical, rational thinking. It also includes emotion and practicality. So it's not just this kind of idealist emphasis on thought and process, which is where it starts to bring in technology. We were kind of talking about it. So technology, he says technology is man right now, it is what he is. So this is maybe where I started getting slightly more confused, but it might be better to, this was kind of from the introduction, so the general kind of introduction of it. So if I go to the actual principle of identity, which is the actual, what's it? I'll start from
his actual lecture.
Yeah, the one I'm supposed to be talking about.
That's right.
So he begins by giving the equation, the mathematical equation, A equals A. So that essentially means that A is equal to one.
To A.
Yeah, A is equal to A. But he says, but what does that principle of but what does that essentially mean? Does that mean anything but the principle of identity? And he kind of just says no, because to say A is the same as A is no, because if something was the same, then you'd only need one of them. So why do we need to say A is equal to A if it's true? If A, you would only need to have the A on its own. So he just says that A equals A just speaks of equality. So it doesn't say that A is the same. It's just saying that it is equal, which is what brings back this is. Saying that A is that every A is itself the same. So it's this idea of the same with itself, which implies this mediation or connection or a unity. Kind of lost my track of thought, so.
You're doing good.
So he says that it's only through speculative idealism that this kind of essence of identity is established, this unity, the essence of identity. But that we can't represent a unity of identity as this sameness, because it ignores the mediation that it kind of implicitly talks about, and takes over and that only gives you an abstract identity. So instead of having this kind of openness to mediation, it kind of gives you something that's more finite. It's a representation of identity. That's
So what does it mean to say that something is an abstract identity? What would be an example of that?
Or like categories, like if somebody describes you like black or white or your ethnic origin, that's how I would know.
No, it's even worse than that, actually. Can I borrow your pen for a second?
Sure.
So, okay. So I could do, let's say they're exactly the same. Okay, that doesn't really tell you anything, right? All it tells you is a tautology, and logic. It's the logic of the circular reasoning, because that is the same as that, and that is the same as that. But beyond that, it doesn't tell you anything. So that's what's abstract. So he's saying that even when you get more sophisticated with this and use the Hegelian mode to come up with, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, goes back around and creates the ground, so on and so forth, you're still going to end up with this tautology. You're still going to end up with taking as a given what you're trying to show. And then the only way it works, the only way it actually creates meaning, is that you tell it that that's what it means.
It's the marks, isn't it?
It's the marks.
The labour force, the standing reserve labour force. One thing's equivalent to the other.
Yes.
Something else replaces me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that it's an abstract identity in that sense. Actually, I don't think that is right.
Is that all right?
No, say that again. You're saying
Well,
that if this is like Mark and this is like,
yeah, I'm replaceable by another worker who's my equivalent. You know,
right,
instead of having an identity where I am my own identity and an individual.
I see, yeah.
It's an abstract, as in you can just replace me with someone else
right.
as an equivalent. Well, they call it fungible, isn't it?
But
Yeah, fungible, which is such a great word. Anyway, yeah.
equivalent is not identical.
Equivalent is not identical.
Identical is only one thing with itself, according to the argument.
Yeah. So it's not quite what Mark, it's not quite what you're saying there in that.
Heidegger says that is I think it says it's exchangeable.
Yes,
You know, it's an equivalent.
but so would a belonging. A belonging together would be exchangeable.
The problem, as I said there, is that this is an example of circular reasoning, because he's decided, or somebody has decided to put in, by putting in the equal sign, they've suggested exactly what there is that they're trying to prove, which is there's an individual, and by even the act of comparing, is it equal or is it not equal, then it's a self-defining concept. Until if that equal sign is not there, then it just, without changing the equation, it's just a single A, but you're never really certain whether that A has any finitude or boundary. It could be
Right.
an infinite A.
Yeah,
Right.
but that's precisely the problem. If you take the equal sign, make the two lines between myself and myself.
Or Lauren.
Or, no, there should be another material here.
Okay,
Exactly as I am, but then is exactly as I am, just 25 centimeters over, therefore it's not me. The only way to have the equal sign working is actually thinking that these two parallel lines go around in a circle and point again to the same myself.
yes,
Which, though, it's not sayable. So that equal sign, that is the language that comes into being and it splits it. And that's the argument, not the problem that Heidegger would like to solve.
the Zeno's paradox problem.
Yes.
Question? No. Did that make sense to you?
Kind of.
By saying these is, you already have opened the concept, object, identity of these to something else. You've created a game, an economy of representation. This is a pen. Well, the plastic and the ink and the metal of these and the pen. You are, all sorts of problems start coming out.
Mm-hmm.
The three-letter PEN do not respond to the three materials. The shape, you can go for.
You're reducing to a category, right?
You create a category and then you apply to
Yeah.
it. So to me, what Heidegger is saying is that the self-circularity, the vicious circle, is the whole of the Western discourse that has set up a number of dimensions or categories, and then is applying them, and as if they were the proper tool or method to reach through, or actually to certify so.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, this cannot work. You have to abandon that and listen in a different way.
The problem of conceptual thought is that it restricts itself to concepts.
Yes.
Was that Heidegger?
I don't know, but it sounds like a Heideggerian remark.
Right.
If I can add the last bit, is that the problem that then was somehow emphasized from his work and later on by somehow superficial postmodernist reading, is that being is precisely what you cannot say. Hence, all the cheap opening up to arts and all the things that follow. He said it's much more. It is too easy if you close it by that as a solution. But in English, what cannot be said.
Well, but then he's so close to Adorno in the sense that there's always something that escapes the concept. And what he's trying to do is that escaping of the concept still is in a relation. So it doesn't escape that far. It doesn't go off the board somewhere. It's still part of the standing reserve in this relationship. We'll come back to that because that's a very complex point. So why don't you continue?
So Heidegger says, does the principle of identity really say anything about the nature of identity itself? And he says that no, because essentially it just presupposes what identity means and where it belongs, which I think is what we were just saying. So he says that the principle of identity in fact speaks of the big B being of beings. And on page 26, he says, as a law of thought, the principle is valid only insofar as it is a principle of big B being that reads, the every being as such, there belongs identity, the unity with itself.
Oh, I see, sorry, okay, sorry.
So as a law of thought, the principle is valid only insofar as it is a principle of being, big B being, that reads, to every being as such, there belongs identity, the unity with itself.
So what's he saying? So that's a critical remark. He's criticizing that view.
Yeah.
So just make sure you realize that. Not you, everybody else. Do you want to just repeat what you understand by that sentence?
It's kind of a critique of Western thinking, so that the unity of identity is forming this basis of a basic characteristic of the big B being of beings.
Did you get really tired of using that B word?
It's quite confusing.
You're going to ban it soon, another B word.
But he talks about that identity makes this claim on us. And without that claim, beings, which is us, we could never appear in their big B being. So we could never. But this is where I didn't follow, because surely we can never appear in a big B being, because it's always the out there. It's never in proximity, so that you could appear as it. Did I just
No. Dasein is, well, Dasein and the big B being aren't exactly the same, but let me just preface that. But for the sake of this particular point, the out there and the relationship between the Dasein and the, let's say, the entity being, in some ways in which he argues the point, and not so much in being in time, but later on, actually through the question of difference, that relation forms being, capital B being. So the relationship between little b being and Dasein, big B being, creates being. Okay, and because that thing that's out there isn't just out there like some sort of weird alien, you know, and has no connection to the little b being. The out there is specifically connected and informed by it, in-formed. It's informed by it. So being, it almost is like, I mean, maybe this will be helpful, maybe this will not be helpful, but in this context, it's kind of like Matthias's feedback loop, or Mandelbrot's notion of the fractal, where you have this relationship where something gets formed and it comes back to create the base in a I'm not explaining it right. Let's see. If you have a situation where E equals mc squared, we're going to use that one, so forget about the Mandelbrot fraction, because I haven't brought that in before. So as it stands, E equals mc squared creates, it's saying energy is velocity times mass squared. Okay. Once you have that, it creates this thing called energy. And the energy then becomes the moment of understanding that then is the next part of the equation that can then be in relationship to little b being. So, probably didn't understand it much better. So, a different way of putting this, again, is that Dasein, the relationship between Dasein and, okay, this way. So you have big B being, and you have little b being, okay, and it's in a relationship, but as we'll get further on in this discussion, the relationship isn't straight together like that, because if it were, being, Dasein would bring in little b being and consume it, and there'd be no more little b being, okay? Likewise, that can't be directly linked to this little b being, because the same thing would happen. It would be consumed. It would become, there would be no distance, as you're saying, no, or as you were saying. There has to be some kind of spatiality involved here, some kind of duration, some kind of something that keeps those apart. Because if the pull is so strong, what would keep them apart? So the way I've explained it in the past, which I don't know is very accurate, but anyway, we're going to go with it, is pretend this is the shoreline and this is the ocean, and there are all these riptides underneath. So in order for the little b being to get back to shore, you have to swim against it. You have to go. What was that word you used before? Oblique. You have to go oblique to this. So he's trying to set up the oblique relationship of little b being to Dasein, which taken together creates being. Does that make sense? Wow. Great. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
To particle physics.
What's that?
Is he answering to particle physics?
I doubt it.
Because
I mean, this could be answering, whether or not he was particularly answering to particle physics, I doubt it.
so the way I understand it, this makes sense to me. The way I understand it is much more verbal, literally linguistic. Again, I did study these originally in Italian, where the verbs are all different, but they are similar as they would be in German. So what we call the big B being is the infinitive.
Is the infinitive.
The one without a termination.
Right.
And the small b being is the present participle, or the gerund, the one that participates of the infinitive.
So one is the to be.
Yes.
That the big B being is the to be.
Yes.
And the little b
Is being.
is being, as
being.
in shopping,
Yes.
swimming,
Yeah.
running.
As a human being or anything else that would
Yeah.
participate.
Okay,
So
participates
in
being.
that case, it becomes, to me, it becomes much easier to understand because you have something that cannot be grasped by itself and is present, but none of the instances satisfy the target because it's much bigger. Actually, it's so big that it's infinite.
Okay, which only adds one tiny little detail that we need to get. The thing that keeps these two apart, let's say the infinitive, I like this explanation, the infinitive and the gerund, is also called an is. Is also the is. So that is the enframement. This bit here enframes the relationship between, or these two things enframe the arena around which we then call that the present. And it's that present, that is, that Foucault and Lyotard and, well, most of them actually, most of the postmodernists, are going to discuss dealing with present, like being in the present. Whereas Hegel and Zizek and that other wing, they're basically making the argument you can never be in the present. You can either be before the present or past the present, but you can never be, there's an abyss, there's abyssal logics going on.
I was going to mention Hegel for, not
Wait,
to contradict
yeah,
this,
okay.
but on this point. Somewhere else, regarding this problem, I read that the Gestell, the enframing, which is to be set up in a structure, in the other book, in the public book, in the two Friedel and Bernard lecture, it's translated as positioning. And the same word is used in Hegel early works, The Essence of Christianity, and another one I can't remember the title of, as the existence in history of the infinitive, or the forms of existence in history. So it is a historical, real, tangible form of being. The Gestalt, the distribution, the disposition.
Okay.
So I was saying to bring in the idea of real temporality, not existing in abstract terms.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm following that, sorry.
Probably was
Okay. But it was a good lecture.
This is emphasis on like self-temporalization instead of differences of differences.
Don't go there yet. We haven't got to difference yet. But you're right. That's correct. Just put that. Just let that sit. We can't use the D word yet. Okay, we're only using the I word today. Okay, go on. Grace collapses. His ID, very
So on page 27, Heidegger says that we must acknowledge the fact that in the earliest period of thinking, long
I'm
before...
so sorry, but I'm like completely incapable of finding where you are here. Bottom? Oh yeah, okay.
We must acknowledge the fact that in the earliest period of thinking, long before thinking had arrived at the principle of identity, identity itself speaks out in a pronouncement which rules as follows: thinking and being belong together in the
Wait, hold on, we're having an issue here. Just a second, okay. Can everybody see this? Okay, great. Okay, go on.
We must acknowledge the fact that in the earliest period of thinking, long before thinking had arrived at a principle of identity, identity itself speaks out in a pronouncement which rules as follows: thinking and being belong together in the same and by virtue of this same.
So you feel like killing yourself if you're reading this.
This sameness is again, like we've said, is this belonging together, which comes again from Parmenides' use of the same. But Parmenides never really establishes what he means by the same. He kind of keeps it obscure. So Heidegger begins to establish this sameness as the thinking and being as this belonging together of the two. And I've already kind of talked about how he plays on the words and he emphasises between belonging and the together. What he tries to do is make us note that the possibility of no longer representing belonging in terms of the unity of the together, but rather to think of experiencing the together in terms of the belonging. So it's kind of a switch of the phrases.
Can anyone read Greek here?
Yes.
So what's the Greek word here? Like I said, just keep it.
Toto. The same.
Oh, here, this is
Toto, yes.
Toto, and what?
The base of tautology.
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 Are you using that word?
Which
Yeah.
Oh, down here.
Yeah, Toto.
one? No, Toto.
Oh, right.
Which are the words?
Gosh, does it look anything like?
It does look like Tautau, actually. It looks like
Yeah,
tautology.
those are the closest letters, yes.
It's so annoying, you know. This always annoys me about translations. They'll translate the German, but then they leave the Greek.
Because he wrote it in Greek.
What? I know he
But
wrote
you
Greek,
should have
but he also wrote in
translated
German. Like, you know.
Something against courage.
What? I don't care. It just annoys me. No, but it doesn't say that it's translated as the same.
Oh,
It's
right.
a tauto. So how do I literally pronounce that?
And
Okay.
the first one is indeed the same thinking is built backward, but thinking indeed the same is thinking and being.
This fragment here.
Yeah, the top paragraph.
Okay, don't be upset for those of you who are trying to get the H or C, just because you can read French and German,
Yeah,
Italian,
this
and
is
now
nice.
Greek. Excellent. Okay. Okay, next. Okay, go on.
So he kind of establishes that if we take thinking as this distinctive kind of characteristic of man, that we remind ourselves of this belonging together that concerns man and big B being. But then he kind of questions like, what does big B being mean, and who and like what is man? How can you kind of establish it? So because we can't sufficiently answer any of this, we can't establish any kind of foundation or a ground for the belonging together of this man and big B being. So he says instead that we need to we represent the togetherness of man and big B being.
Faster.
As this kind of coordination, and you either take it from the point of view of man or from the point of view of big B being within the traditional concept, which I think he means metaphysics, so that's how metaphysics used to see it. So by saying that man is a being, it means that essentially he belongs to the totality of this big B being, and he belongs to essentially the order of big B being. But man's ability to think is what defines him from others and brings him into this kind of face-to-face relationship with big B being. So man and being are now brought into this kind of relationship.
Although, just parenthesis, thinking doesn't mean like contemplation.
Yeah.
Okay, just to be clear there. Go on.
It will be awareness.
Attunement. But we'll go back to
Right,
that.
just to oneself,
No,
not as much.
not as literal as that. Go on.
So he says that the essence of man is this responding to big B being, and that big B being is essentially a presence. So that on page 31 he says, being is present and abides only as it concerns man through the claim it makes on him.
Wait,
Sorry.
what paragraph?
It's just towards the bottom of the middle bottom of the page.
Okay, being is present,
Yeah,
yeah.
being is present and abides only as it concerns man through the claim it makes on him. And for it is man open toward being who alone lets being arrive as presence. So man has to, the relationship between man and being is what essentially allows being to become present. That's how I followed it.
Does
Is
anybody,
that
yeah,
big being? Or
yes, that is,
Big
yeah.
being.
Yeah. You want to, there's an expression in the US called knife in the head, which is like, just like, after a while with this being, same being. Another way of putting this, which might be clearer in a certain sense, or clearer than this, is that there's this relationship between belonging together and longing to just be. This relationship between longing to belong, wanting to be part of the group, as it were, and at the same time, whilst part of the group, wanting to be by yourself. This relation between longing to be and belonging and longing to be alone. I put it longing to be alone because he just says longing to be, but it's to be alone. Longing just to be left alone, longing just to have your distance. So this relation between togetherness, as it were, belonging to the same, and at the same point the step back of longing just to be, longing to be alone, that creates this appropriation.
So you could say it's like longing to be, well, I don't know, could you say it's longing to be, like the belonging together is like the longing to be the representational, and longing to be left alone is the longing to escape the representation.
Mm-hmm. But you could also say that longing to be together, let's say, doesn't have to necessarily be about representation. It has to do with Dasein. It has to be with belonging to a set, a community, an environment, an economy.
or the infinite?
Yeah, any of that. That's right. I mean, just longing to be that. But if you're swept into that, again, then the presence collapses. That very delicate present.
Which is keeping the two apart.
Which is keeping the two apart. But the only thing you have to be careful about is he's not talking about your conscious attempt to have furrowed eyebrows and demand to be, I want to be alone, kind of the Greta Garbo moment. It's more that the relationship it simultaneously requires the belonging and the distance. And whether or not it's not meant to be psychological, it's not meant to be conscious in that sense. Yeah.
Is that the essence?
There's no essence.
Can we look at that diagram that you
Which
sort
one?
of speak about what you've just spoken
Oh,
about?
this
the
one?
relation. No, the little b and the big B.
Sad little diagram.
Is that also the abstract and the infinite? The little b and the big B and the spatiality.
Well,
is
I
the
think
relation.
that rather than call it an abstract, I think what Matthias said as calling it a gerund is more accurate. Like a gerund is, like the ing of something. Walking, swimming, thinking, moving, ing. So it's abstract, but it's not really abstract in the sense that you mean it doesn't exist. It's the transitive version. Except it's not completely transitive, because if it were completely transitive, it would be part of the is, the equal sign, which is little b being, oops, big B being, and that's an equal sign. That's what that is. It's an equal sign. And that's the transitive there. The equal sign, see? I can draw like this. so you have this relationship here pulls them together, but the question is what keeps them apart. That's the next part that he's getting into. It's clear that there's some sort of pulling toward Dasein. It's clear that one belongs to Dasein, but how is it that one's kept apart from Dasein? Because otherwise it just collapses.
Dasein is the gerund. Dasein is the infinitive.
This is the gerund, the gerund.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dasein is
The infinitive.
the infinitive. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So the question is what keeps them apart? Like the first part of this lecture is what keeps them together, what makes them belong. But what allows one to long to be, i.e. to get the distance. That's what he's getting to now. And all of that, belonging and longing to be, that's all part of the identity.
And that's thinking that keeps them apart.
Yes, but the question then is what is called thinking? Because thinking is not contemplation.
No, it's like you said, attunement.
It's a tumor.
Attunement.
Attunement. Oh yes. It's like attunement. Why did I say that? It's wrong. Close.
But it's a process. I mean,
It's not a process, it is realizing that these games taking place. That's all.
But it's not realizing in the Hegelian sense of to realize a conceptual thing that then you move forward on.
No, it's realizing as in, it's more of a line, it's an epiphanic moment where one feels, understands, can easily, this is it. And
The aha moment.
but it is, and if one has to describe it, he would describe it, this is the game he plays constantly, would describe it exactly with the same words one had used before. Because one realizes that, who am I? Well, I am the one who is asking, who am I?
yeah, I mean, this seems to me that he's falling into his own trap of tautological logic, where he's saying, well, I am because I'm thinking, with the caveats that he put in. But if he's applying a gerund thinking to the gerund of being, and then he's effectively kind of just forming out a different logic, so being is different from to be, because it takes place over time. There's a kind of temporal aspect to it, and that temporal aspect is shared with thinking as it is with all other gerunds.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously.
And so how does it stay apart? Because that's collapsing everything, right? So
yeah.
how does it? But what's his argument in here? He doesn't say time in here, in this bit. How does that stay apart? That's your next step, right?
Well, we can keep going.
That's what your next step should be, right? Okay, so Grace is going to answer this.
Okay.
Okay.
Try.
Okay.
So he's saying that man and being belong to each other and that they were appropriated by each other.
Okay.
So that this belonging together is an intertwining of man and being. But in order to enter this domain of the belonging together, we have to move away from representational thinking. And that is the leap that is away from this big being as ground.
And what is representational thinking? I don't know. I don't care. Sick of it.
I don't know if I could articulate what I think representation. Well, it's kind of this. It comes from Western things, like Western thought. So, I suppose would it be Descartes and rationalistic thinking? That kind of. Don't know.
Want to give it? Anybody else? Someone help. Someone jump in and help. Yes. But why is representational thinking being seen as a bad criminal here?
It's sort of what something is rather than who something. It's propositional. It starts off from a certain point of view in the history of, and I think Grace is right in the sense that it is Descartes. That would be a starting point for it, for representation of art.
But what's being represented?
One of his ontological structures, one of the existentials, one of the structures that has to do with reality, not the existentials as in the things like projection and the being in the world, all that kind of being amongst others, the existential relation, the projection, the curiosity, and these kind of things that in the metaphysics are totalized and
What does the word representation mean? Yeah.
the representation.
The represent. Sorry.
The thing is a whatness rather than a who-ness.
There's a whatness, yeah, that's true.
It says what something is rather than who.
I think he doesn't like representational thinking because there's this element of the figural, there's this element of the visual, and that implies that it needs to be, even if it's just notional, but it needs to be regarded, and to be regarded, one has to look from the outside, and I think he really would like us to think this from the inside.
Okay, we're getting warmer.
We make decisions. We make decisions and choices in our life, but those choices, or there is also structures from which we can make the choices in life. There's a difference between the ontic existential and the existential. It's spelled differently, aren't it?
Yes, but just why do these people want to get out of representation? What is the issue?
A form of abstraction in terms of ideas and beliefs rather than an embodied sense of.
Yes, you're right.
What's it, the equality? Isn't it the equal sign is saying what something, an equivalent, or pen as pen is the equivalent. It's saying what something is through a structure, through already in place series of linguistic
Good, we're getting very warm here, yes.
In a propositional way, and that to get out of that is not to have the same relation to being as what you find in that manner of understanding. Again, I would just reiterate the what and the who-ness or something.
I would caution against that. Let me put it like...
Or the how. Rather the how.
The how.
The what and the how.
Yeah, the what and how, that makes sense. But one problem is that the present in metaphysics cannot exist. It cannot exist as such. So it must always have something that's a standard bearer of it. That's called representation. Whether it's a metaphor, or it's an example, it's a symbol, it's a sign, signifier. And what Heidegger is suggesting is that one has to understand that the present, apart from everything else, not only can be inhabited, but the basis of identity deals with this peculiar way in which the inhabitation is processed. And so he wants to get out of the thinking of representation precisely because it is blinding one to the fact that the is actually exist as a kind of non-seeable, non-sayable surface. Now, later on, not because of Heidegger's moves, but one could make the move that that thing, that surface, is not dissimilar to the equal sign of E equals mc squared, which combines the relation between energy, mass, and speed, and has no structure to hold it. The thing about Einstein's argument is that one understands relativity not because it's all things possible at any given time, but that in a certain arrangement, the belonging and the not belonging create this cohesion. And this cohesion, the equal sign, becomes the environment around which to say that something can be represented is to imply that you can't discuss that arena because it's an abyss, an abyssal logic. It's a nothing. It's a no nothing.
In which way though, Heidegger formula is different than A equals A? They both walk around an equal sign. It always puzzles me.
Mm-hmm.
And the only tentative answer I can give is that Heidegger's formula is supposed to where, and yet it is not conclusive. It's not a null and null formula. While A equals A is just creating a distance, something like that. I think it's in this direction that I don't understand fully why the two equals work in this way.
Grace, you have a comment on that? Let's put that as one of the questions to ask. But let's press on with this. So we're on page 32, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, on page, I'm saying that it requires this leap away from big B being as ground, and obviously away from representation of thinking. And then on page 33.
Wait, before you get to page 33, do you have those pages in front of you?
Yeah.
Can you read out the two paragraphs that go, or the three paragraphs, we stubbornly misunderstand as prevailing? Can you explain that? Because I think it has to be, I want to make sure people get this problem.
Which page?
It's the page before 33, 32. Really sorry, came out wrong here.
We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of man and being, as long as we represent everything.
Wait, slower. Like as though you are applying for the Academy Award, and you're really discussing the trauma of the stubbornness of misunderstanding.
We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of man and being, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic. Then we always find only connections that are established either in terms of being or in terms of man, and that present the belonging together of man and being as an intertwining.
Okay, read that paragraph again, this time with meaning. This time as though your life depended on it.
Oh,
Gun to the head.
actually.
I know, just try.
No pressure.
No pressure, right.
We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of man and being, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic. Then we always find only connections that are established either in terms of being or in terms of man, and that present the belonging together of man and being as an intertwining.
Good. Anybody else want to give it a go, reading that paragraph? Here, read that paragraph aloud. You're reading it very well. It's not that you're not reading it well. This is not a criticism. Yeah.
We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of man and being, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic.
And just read that sentence one more time. I think we've almost got it.
We stubbornly misunderstand this prevailing belonging together of man and being, as long as we represent everything only in categories and mediations, be it with or without dialectic.
Good, next sentence.
Then we always find only connections that are established either in terms of being or in terms of man, and that present the belonging together of man and being as an intertwining.
Keep going.
We do not as yet enter the domain of the belonging together. How can such an entry come about? By our moving away from the attitude of representational thinking. This move is a leap in the sense of a spring. The spring leaps away from the habitual idea of man as the rational animal who in modern times has become a subject for his objects.
Translation, anyone?
He's trying to get out of a model.
Yes, Aristotle, basically.
And he needs to break that model, and that's what you have to leap out of. And the rational, I think, is probably the critical word there. The leap is a leap of the rational away from the rational. So you're kind of being invited to think about magic or
Points of grace.
So well, it's the left-hand path there.
I don't think he's saying that at all.
Okay, what do you think
I
he's saying?
think when he talked about the confusion earlier last week, when we talked about the confusion of metaphysics, as the non-sensuous and the suprasensuous, I think what he's saying is that is that what relation, and it's not how it, to embody the being is really, it's almost like in the doing, as it were, if it was a sort of Marxist kind of slant to it. It's, you can't find being through an intellectual exercise. In that sense, it's not Parmenides thinking of being belong together in the same. I don't think he's saying that. I think it's a much more, like if you come in this room and not what am I, and I sit down as a professor of philosophy or whatever it is, it's more sort of who am I, finding your path in the relation to being in the present that he's talking about.
But that is what Barnaby said.
Exactly what Barnaby said, but I don't think that's lending itself to the supernatural, which is simply another version of the metaphysical understanding, the anthropomorphizing of being. That's how I would understand that, because that becomes a representation.
Well, I think it's a question of, I mean, I think that you're sort of saying in a certain kind of way, saying the same thing in a certain different with a different approach. I mean, what you're saying is effectively is that he's already identified the model as having its inherent flaws, and it's only through moving through it, as in operating or even performing it, that you kind of phenomenological kind of moving through it.
That's the method.
But I think there's a bit more to it in this. I mean, it might be just a romantic move, but I think he wants to kind of, even though he's sort of he's criticised the model of metaphysics for its failure to be flawed. That he now wants to, now he needs to inject a little bit of something, whether it's a kind of, a bit of theatre or something, but it's this leap out of the irrational manoeuvre.
But when he talks about in the essay, what is metaphysics, and the relationship to being, is when everything's, that movement away from you, which makes manifest the angst that is about anxiety. And I think that's what he's getting at in the attunement, not tools like the supernatural. I mean, that would be
perhaps it was a poor example.
It's an interesting example.
The supernatural,
I think it's a very interesting example, but to get into to take the voice of the attunement, because it's a kind of listening in the word itself. The steamer, it means this voice in German, doesn't it? So it's a kind of listening to something. There's a person listening to themselves saying.
That was fantastic. How perfect was that?
This listening to oneself, and then coming up with that, because he's critical in what we did last week. He's critical of how metaphysics now means this mysterious world, of this world behind this world, of an ultimate behind this world.
Yeah, that's true.
He was critical of that.
Okay, Mattia?
I think Mark is right. I would add to it that when he says rational animal, and says that the response to it would be lead, is that it isn't a matter of doing a demonstration according to the same principles, because the rationality there is the same principle of causality, scientific and technological in a material small way, that is both the expression and the support of the bigger frame we discussed before, where everything can be dealt with, can be understood, put to use, and it has a completely different set of dimensions that is interested in and he wants to get to. So you don't even try to fix these, you just leap out of it. You abandon the idea of a thinking little animal that goes around and understands and dominates the
I don't understand how that's not what that's what I heard you be saying.
Yeah, but it's not opening up to an irrationality.
But to mention the supernatural wasn't to mention rationality, or like a alternative form of rationality. I didn't see it as...
When in the thing that I sent round, it does say doesn't want to abandon metaphysics. He just says man as a rational animal is, metaphysics is creed, or doesn't actually say that, but
he doesn't.
He says it does say
the next one.
It doesn't say we're abandoning metaphysics. He talks about in the introduction to the fifth printing of What is Metaphysics, that essay, he says that to get out of metaphysics, to go beyond metaphysics, doesn't mean abandoning metaphysics, but as I say, it's not trying to get rid of metaphysics as such. So that stays on the
but no, but you can't. If he's making an irrational leap out of a model, right? It's very far from saying which is what I suggested he was trying to do. But it's very far removed from saying the leap's too big to say that he's abandoning that model, because it's like saying the diver jumping off the board is abandoning the board. I mean, it's quite the contrary. He needs the board to make the leap.
I think he's abandoning the method, but I don't think he's abandoning. I mean, the thing about appropriation is it's like into the good. It's a good appropriation, the leap of appropriation. Although at the same time, then when he starts talking about fragments from Anaximander and how the originary is also the end, so hence when he starts talking about ruin. But there is something about the event
I think you both are being very hard on Barnaby, although you're capable.
No, I think Barnaby's very. I'm not being hard on Barnaby. It's not Barnaby that. it's not Barnaby that's sacrificing my goat. But it's just some other issue that. No, I think Barnaby's really very interesting. It's just.
But it does market here. Now, this move is a leap in the sense of a spring. The spring leaps away from the habitual idea of man as a rational animal who in modern times has become a subject for his objects.
Mm-hmm. So why is that not the
Because
Aristotelian?
this subject and object is a problem. He wants to break away this hierarchy, which is enframing, the technological. They're putting everything into standing reserve, which has captured man as somehow a simulacrum of the reality. And what he says is that this needs to be abandoned for a relation where this hierarchy no longer exists.
Yes, but why is that not what Barnaby was saying? That's what I don't understand. I mean, I'm not trying to.
No, I understand what you mean. No, it's not that I'm just adding clarification to what these sounds like.
Okay, because it seems to me that you're saying, both of you are saying what Barnaby was saying with the small problem that you also mentioned the supernatural, and therefore threw people into.
Twitching fits.
Okay, continue. That was a good point. Yeah, page 33.
Oh, do you want me to tell him?
Yeah.
Where does the spring go that where does the spring go that springs away from the ground? Into an abyss? Yes, as long as we only represent the spring in the horizon of metaphysical thinking. No, insofar as we spring and let go. Where to? To where we already have access, to the belonging to being. Being itself, however, belongs to us, but only with us can being be present as being, that is, become present.
Okay, so did you want to throw yourself off a diving board at this point? So what does that sentence mean?
He's kind of saying that just to take yourself on this leap out of this already kind of established system doesn't mean that you're throwing yourself into something that's completely unknown. It's just almost like a return to the place that we kind of already understand, but perhaps we don't know we're aware of. That's
Where's
how
my
I-
diagram? Here it is. So, in this situation where you have the shoreline, and this little bit here, and then being, you're leaping into here. It's not unknown, but it's not known. It's not a stranger, but it's not beyond a knowable, because it's a concealed. How do I say it's even concealed? It's rather that it's not fully comprehensible, but it's knowable. I mean, it makes sense because already it's been established because of that relationship. So where he says, where does the spring go that springs away from the ground? Okay, into an abyss? No. Yes, as long as we only represent the spring as a horizon. No, insofar as we spring, whee, and let go, poof, and fall in here, where we already have access, see this relationship, the belonging to being. Being itself, however, belongs to us, right? Because this is the same relationship. For only with us can being be present as being. That is, becomes present. So a different way of putting this is that the present exists to the degree to which this relationship is established. And if that relationship is not established, there is no present, there's only past and future, which is a creepy sense of time.
So the relationship, it's not that the relationship makes time, it makes
present time,
present time.
present tense.
And if we speak only of past and future, we can speak of origin and telos.
Right.
So we speak of absolute endpoints that are of no interest to us.
Well, I don't know if that's strong, but anyway.
Okay, well, but how is this leaping and letting go different than jumping from the window and hoping that God will make me land safely?
You do this to try and go.
No, that's because I think is there a very, a mystical
No.
form coming up?
No, he's not saying that the hand of God, like Adam Smith's hand of the market, is going to come in and save us in the leap.
Okay.
God has nothing to do with this.
So there is no, I mean, I do understand it, but I can't articulate this is why I'm asking it. There isn't at all any sort of extra agency that handles all these. Just exactly not what he's talking about.
Exactly not what he's talking about. Correct. Continue. Please. So that's a spring, yeah, but which is not meant a brook or a river. A spring is needed in order to experience authentically the belonging together of man and being. This spring is the abruptness of the unbridged entry into the belonging which alone can create it toward each other of man and being, and thus the consolation of the two. Now, you were going to go into somewhere else on this page. I don't want to hijack that. So, what were you going to?
I was going to read that quote that we just read about the spring and springing into an abyss. That was where I was going.
Okay. And what did that mean to you?
Just as I kind of just said that it's coming back to something that you are not comfortable with. You are aware of it, like you were saying. It's that middle kind of. The leap into the middle, so it's not something that's completely not knowable. It is something that you have a kind of relationship to, and that's why he feels like it's not such a strange thing to make this leap, that it isn't possible.
It doesn't. Maybe another way of looking at this is when one thinks about a work of art, one's own work of art. When you're thinking about making some work of art, do you have it completely planned out in your head? It's like you're taking the leap. You're going, all right, I'm in my studio, or I'm sitting at my desk, or like I've now cleaned the house, I've done everything possible I could do before I'm now going to start on this project. Okay, now I'm starting on the project, I make the leap. But it's not a leap into completely I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, if it was, it would be not a repeatable kind of, it wouldn't be a coherent scenario where it would make something work. And all of this is leading, at least in part, not all of it, but it's in part leading to the question of art. So when lost, think to yourself, what does one need to get a piece of work done? What do you need to do? What do you need to do to understand this? You need to take a step back to sort of see what the hell, if he talks about that being one more time, must kill him, and then go into it. He's talking about this kind of relationship that we all, he's suggesting that everybody, but anyway, certainly artists, are having this relationship with the technique of knowing what to take. You're being pulled by Dasein, or whatever, you're being pulled to, but what are you actually going to take back? What are you going to bring back from that little trip?
Yeah, my example is slightly different. When it's
Completely different.
No, it's not. When I come here to Birmingham, I've never been here before in my life. The first time I come straight here, so it was second time, off the train, I've got an hour, so I turn right and just wander. I have no idea where I am. And there's a kind of overwhelming arrival, like this place, yeah? So, and there's a slight edge, like what you call thinking of the oblique, swimming against everything. I'm not in tune, I'm bumping into stuff, let's say, you know, it's not going quite right. My thoughts are anxious and they take on strange forms and stuff, and there's that kind of concealed element, I think, that, you know, in the arrival, there's concealing in yourself. So. But then over time, as the more times I do it, that anxiety doesn't hang on me in that manner. And whatever was concealed, which I don't know, is obviously now made manifest because I'm now actually happy, you know. And that is a fact. That's how that's me listening to myself. But those first few times, you know, there's that anxiety of the new and whatever it is, and then as you get more into it, you kind of find that attunement, as it were. You find yourself being gripped by what you said, what you take from these spaces. I know walkways. I know where I need to be and go if I need to be and go. And I think that's the same what you were saying with the art.
Yeah. Did you have a point? No. Okay. Yep.
I don't know if I should say this. It's kind of like when you're in a museum and you look at things in a glass box and they're categorised in an order. And it doesn't tell you about the actual everyday use of those things and people and senses and all that goes with it. Yeah.
In fact, it tells you nothing.
Compared to that, when we were in London, and I was going back and forth to London all the time, I was in museums all the time. Before I come to the lesson, I was always in museums. And you're right, that at first they're just there and stuff, but eventually they start to almost talk to you, like the bells, I can hear them ringing, like in the British Museum, there's loads of bells and Tibets. Because I'm doing it like multiple times in a year, like lots and lots of times, as you're saying, going to see this stuff, after a while it does begin to speak to you, you know, and I'm not kidding. You know, the bells, all of a sudden those are bells, and I think I can hear them, you know, and they're kind of starting to talk to you. I think that's something like what you were, I'm understanding.
And what Diana was saying was basically that the little notes that are next to them don't do that.
They disappear.
They disappear, and they don't tell you anything.
No.
They give you the appearance of telling you something.
Well, as an undergraduate, I used to go into the National Gallery, and I had used to do things like I'd just look at those little things, completely ignore the paintings and just look at the little captions. Then I always want to go around on a bicycle and just follow the colour blue around, but you know, I don't know.
That's great. Very good. I think that we should. There's a film there.
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to say about that museum thing. Now I've forgotten. Oh, okay, continue. Sorry, I'll come up with it.
No, so it's the gathering, I suppose, that like we're saying, you get gripped by something, but it's how you gather, and that's what brings you into this relationship between you as the being and then you as Dasein, or the big B being. And there's this a mutual challenging between big B being and man, as he says it. And this kind of appropriation is what happens within the framework. So there's an ownership and an appropriation. And he says that within the framework there prevails a strange ownership and a strange appropriation on page 36, which he then develops into the event of appropriation. That he says also on page 36, that we must experience simply this owning in which man and being are delivered over to each other. That is, we must enter into what we call the event of appropriation.
This is like the most crucial thing.
And he says that the event of appropriation is something that is singular and it happens uniquely. The event of appropriation is that realm vibrating within itself through which man and being reach each other in their nature, achieve their active nature by losing those qualities which metaphysics has endowed on them. So they completely, everything, well, does he mean like representation by metaphysics? Is that how he?
Yes, in that particular.
Because he goes on to develop that language is, because of its delicate nature, it's something that's most susceptible to this kind of vibration, and therefore it holds everything together in this structure of appropriation, which is maybe what Mattia was saying.
Yeah, that's what Mattia was. And now Barnaby, that you're thinking of, can you read that from there to there? Just so we, and very slowly, so people can hear exactly what Grace has just said. Grace stroke Mark.
The belonging together of man and being in the manner of mutual challenge drives home to us with startling force that and how man is delivered over to the ownership of being and being.
Now just repeat that sentence just so people
I
get
didn't
that.
finish the sentence.
Okay, I know.
I'll try again. The belonging together of man and being in the manner of mutual challenge drives home to us with startling force that and how man is delivered over to the ownership of being and being is appropriate to the essence of man. So I have no idea what you just said there, or even I just said, I should say.
Okay, Matthias, you want to try it?
The belonging together of man and being in a manner of mutual challenge drives home to us with startling force that and how man is delivered over to the ownership of being, and being is appropriated to the essence of man.
Does that make more sense now?
The that refers to something in the
That
previous
and how.
sentence.
No, it's not.
No,
It's
no.
not the pronoun in that case. It's it is not.
See, this is the great thing about studying languages. You know all these kind of things, adverbs, pronouns, gerunds. The that and how, is that what Mark was talking about?
Yeah.
Earlier, when Mark was originally talking about who, but then changed it to that
Both
and
the
how.
object and the method, or the object and the way that the thing is brought home.
Say that bit again, just so we hear it again. No, not that bit, the sentence.
The belonging together of man and being in the manner of mutual challenge drives home to us with startling force that and how man is delivered over to the ownership of being, and being is appropriate to the essence of man.
Right,
So it is this reciprocal and simultaneous move. On one way, man, I don't like to say man, the individual,
Yeah.
you humans are opening up, and at the same time are taken in. And they take in, sorry. So this is the case of the feedback loop, if you like.
Yes, this is the feedback loop that you're
The two things happen together. The smaller elements, the gerunds, participates of the infinitive, and the infinitive opens up to them, doesn't it? I mean, because it doesn't close. I believe what's very important here, that this game between the two does not form a perfect boundary where these two groups, they're not two groups because one is one, the other one is multiple. They are not solidified in anything that is final. This is why it speaks about liberation. It continues happening, and it is an open field.
Continue.
So I'm going to just reread that sentence.
Okay, reread it again.
The belonging together of man and being in the manner of mutual challenge drives home to us with startling force how and that man is delivered over to the ownership of being, and being is appropriate to the essence of man. Within the framework, there prevails a strange ownership and a strange appropriation. We must experience simply this owning, in which man and being are delivered over to each other. That is, we must enter into what we call the event of appropriation. The words event of appropriation, thought of in terms of the matter indicated, should now speak as a key term in the service of thinking. As such a key term, it can no more be translated than the Greek logos or the Chinese Dao. The term event of appropriation here no longer means what we would otherwise call a happening, an occurrence. It now is used as a singulare tantum. What it indicates happens only in the singular. No, not in any number, but uniquely.
What does tantum mean? Does it, or
As such.
at the moment? It's like right then. Yeah, okay, go on.
What we experience in the frame as the constellation of being and matter. So what we experience in the frame as the constellation of being and man through the modern world of technology is a prelude to what is called the event of appropriation. This event, however, does not necessarily persist in its prelude. For in the event of appropriation, the possibility arises that it may overcome the mere dominance of the frame to turn it into a more original appropriating. Such a transformation of the frame into the event of appropriation, by virtue of that event, would bring the appropriate recovery, appropriate, hence never to be produced by man alone, of the world of technology, from its dominance back to servitude, in the realm by which man reaches more truly into the event of appropriation.
Translation. He looks at Grace.
No, I was looking, I was squinting at the
At the Dasein.
my interpretation. I have to read it away
Can
now.
you read it once more?
Yeah, can you read it? You want to try it out loud?
Not because we read it better, but just to read here. The term event of appropriation here no longer means what we would otherwise call a happening, an occurrence. It now is used as a singular attempt. What it indicates happens only in the singular. No, not in any number, but uniquely. What we experience in the frame as a constellation of being and man to the modern world of technology is a prelude to what is called the event of appropriation. So what we discussed earlier is a prelude to these, which is far more important than this moment. This event, however, does not necessarily persist in its prelude. For the event of appropriation, in the event of appropriation, the possibility arises that it may overcome the mere dominance of the frame to turn into a more original appropriating. Also in framing its shell. Such a transformation of the frame into the event of appropriation, by virtue of that event, would bring the appropriate recovery, appropriate, hence, never to be produced by man alone, by man alone, of the world of technology from its dominance back to servitude, in the realm by which man reaches more truly into the event of appropriation. The last sentence is probably.
Yeah, read that again.
Such a transformation of the frame into the event of appropriation, by virtue of that event, would bring the appropriate recovery, appropriate, hence, never to be produced by man alone.
So,
To appropriate, hence, is never to be produced by man alone. Is that what it means? Is it sort of missing two bits? No, it wouldn't make sense. Appropriate recovery of the world of technology from its dominance back to servitude. So we are no longer dominated by technology, but technology comes back in.
They're no longer sort of replicating, because this is like
representing.
when you say how books things apart, this is like where difference comes in.
That's the word we're not allowed to use at the moment.
Oh, I don't remember.
No, we're not there yet. Not a difference yet. You're right. You're right. I know that
I
you're.
think that he's casting this relationship between the B of being and the small b, big B, and the little b, and this relationship. He's casting that, the grasping of that, the landing, if you like, after the knee, the reaching in, the grasping into that. He's saying that by the event of reaching in and holding on and finding it, that this relationship between the two B's turns into, well, that's a technological object. It's a tool, but it's turned from something which casts a sort of that man is subsumed by or within, to that gesture of grasping then turns it back into a tool. So in other words, if you kind of the carpe diem, if we were going to stick in the Latin,
Seize the day. We're going to have
is
all
languages
now.
We're going to go all Latin all
That's
day,
right.
all afternoon. But the notion of carpe diem, where you seize the day and you turn kind of what can be poor circumstances or just the kind of overbearing notion of time. If you seize it, you can turn it into, you can change its function and turn it into.
And you're also being seized by it.
Yeah.
Which is important. That's
Yeah.
Gripped.
So it's exactly what Mark was saying about this being now, and the sort of like the optimistic view of it, or maybe optimistic is not the right word, but the pleasure of it is exactly the attunement that happens, so that, and that attunement begins to structure identity. That's where he's going with this. This is the lecture, remember, his lecture on identity.
But an identity that is never produced by man alone.
Right. And
This
so
is why
it can never be A equals A in the
appropriate
Hegelian
was
sense.
tricking me here. The appropriate recovery, appropriate.
Yeah,
Therefore, the proper relationship is one that is never produced by man alone.
that's right.
But this is the bit that escapes. I mean, because this is well, this is a question rather than a statement. But though he's urging the kind of the event of appropriation is a movement by man to grasp into this relationship. He's suggesting that you don't have sole ownership of this. That there's a bit escapes because it's a conceptual grasping, and there's a bit is missing basically.
That's right.
It escapes.
Did that make sense to you, Grace?
Can you just repeat it?
The it's just that little subclause where it says so effectively the event of appropriation brings the appropriate recovery in the recovery of the relationship of the two between the two B's. It can never be produced by man alone. It means that you don't have sole authorship over the changing of this relationship from a pre-originary state into a tool, and because it's a conceptual grasping, and as he's just told us that something is always missing from the concept, and that something that's missing is the bit which is produced by whatever isn't man alone.
Can we go back to the other point, the notion of singular tandem, the fact that it happens uniquely? Because it also speaks of vibrations, or something that repeats itself continuously.
So I'm wondering what's the degree to which there's a translation issue here. That you don't have to have the German. The reason I'm asking is because it strikes me that singularitatem is kind of it's a kind of a remark that Leotard will pick up on in terms of intensity, and intensity is about that moment, and the moment doesn't have any length of time. An intense moment has time, but it's a kind of abstract notion of time, or it's a different form of time. It's a dimension of time as opposed to a chronology of time, and as a result, that it's happening in one moment. The oneness of it is a dimension moment. It's a dimension of one. It's not that it happens only once in one's lifetime and that kind of thing. But it's a singular, like a Klein bottle, like a Mobius strip. It has only one dimension. It can only operate at the level of it's not an epiphany. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not this kind of like, it's not an aha moment. That's not what's going on. It's a moment that creates the environment around which something can occur. So you could say, I mean, following, just on that kind of level, he's not speaking about this, but you could make the leap by saying that is the God particle. It's this moment that doesn't exist except in this relationship when it creates the existence.
I was thinking more about briefly, along very similar line in logic of sense, Deleuze calls the eventum datum.
Yes.
The very fact that events can take place.
Yes. And he's getting it from here.
Yeah, this is what I thought. But then that uniqueness is not that it happens only once, but it almost is that it is the condition of the event. It is an event that keeps on happening. It doesn't have a discrete time, but it's an eternal present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that eternal present, though, because it's an eternal present, can only be, that's what's singular about it. It's not singular in the sense that that's why he says it's not a number, it's a dimension. I think that's the best way of understanding that.
It's like the thing, if you put the attunement in there, that's the attunement. pages that come in the next section of the fundamental concepts of metaphysics, he starts with attunement. He talks about boredom. Boredom length has that ability to lengthen time. It doesn't actually lengthen programs, but it doesn't make anything. Or when you're having fun, time shortens.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing he's talking about.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's very important, that aspect of it. It's these kind of colors to time that he's getting into. So Grace, you have more?
Not really, just that it then states that the essence of identity is a property of this event of appropriation. So identity is created through this, this event of appropriation. But yeah, I think I could do rereading as well, just so that I can clarify everything that I've said today. So I don't necessarily.
But I think you've done a phenomenal job, a really phenomenal job. Normally, we don't usually get through the lecture in one go. I think it's pretty impressive. No, it's pretty impressive. Okay, so how many people can now say, with attunement certainty, what is this event of appropriation? Because this is going to become the sine qua non to postmodernist thinking, this thing called the event of appropriation. It is the method, as it were. It's trying to replace a dialectical move. So what is it? Lauren, you want to give it a first go?
No.
No.
That's right.
Relating the event of appropriation to postmodernism.
No, just what did he, forget about that. That will be later. But what is this again saying though?
What he is he's postulating that identity is made up, or is established by a gesture which he describes as an event of appropriation, which is a grasping of, or rather into, a technological construct, which is a relation between to be the infinitive and being the gerund, which is in a...
And that causes what? Starts with an A, ends with a G. That's an F in the middle.
That causes...
What's in here? Causes... Starts with an E.
Oh, and framing.
And framing. Very good.
I think it's starting with an A.
I said it started with an E.
Oh shit, well, there we go. I was thinking it was like half button or something like that. It's a fucking German word, isn't it?
Okay, so excellent seminar today. Really good group, really good work here. I would like to, you're doing next week on difference? You are doing next week.
Right, okay, there we go. I'm doing next week on difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's
I don't.
She's got it. That's yours.
Huh? I've got your thing. Yeah.
This?
Yeah.
Right, okay, I'll go for it.
Oh, you're next week. Oh, sorry, you're not doing next week. Sorry, you're doing next week, and you're doing next week.
Not 2 weeks. No, next week. Yeah. Am I there next week?
Yes.
Or the week after?
No.
Yeah,
The
so-
5th of February is next week.
Yeah.
Can you just read that?
So Lauren to summarise lectures 1 to 2, Mattia to summarise lecture 3, the principle of identity, Freiburg lectures.
So basically what we're going to do is, when I was coming up with this thing, we were all talking about it, I actually thought this piece would take us a little bit longer to get our heads around. So it's kind of good that we'll have like another 3 hours on identity, but this time through the Freiburg-Raymond lectures, where he is a little clearer, but maybe he's less clear, I don't know, I'm not sure. I thought he was clearer in that. And then you're going to then we'll get into difference, but we're not discussing the word difference until 2 weeks from now, okay? Because it'll complicate matters. I just keep going back around this question of the leap, the enframing, the techna, the attunement. These are all very important.
Would it be right to say that the leap is is the ethical point, is the word choice takes place.
Well, it is where the choice takes place, but whether or not it's ethical is another question altogether.
Okay, that's my confusion, because I conflict the two.
It might be a political thing, but even that is pushing anything. Okay, Thunderbar. Now, for those of you that are in Birmingham on Thursday, at 5 o'clock, people are invited to go to this thing called Stan's Cafe, which, do you know where that is by any chance? Stan's Cafe? Yeah, do you know where it is? Anyway, Stan's Cafe, the reason people are invited to Stan's Cafe is because everyone who's making work, in particular, are being invited to exhibit it at this famous Stan's Cafe, which apparently is an amazing place. I haven't seen it. There's some curators and directors and I don't know what, a whole bunch of people that are involved who want to show the kind of work that we're doing. So make sure you go. And that's why, for those of you that are going to the MA, normally we have it on Thursday, but in fact we're having it tomorrow night. So, any questions so far? Good, welcome.
Thank you, that was great.
Okay.
What, Stan's Cafe? Where's Stan's Cafe?
I don't know.
Out in the field.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Talking about in
the MA lecture, that is, we're actually talking about something similar. We're doing, what are we talking about, Mattia? You did the lecture last week.
Last week they made the horizon and the introduction to anti-leaders. Next time, I don't know, I'm doing more of them?
No. Yes, Your Honor, I haven't mentioned this. You're doing the entire semester. No, so what we're doing is, do you have the MA syllabus?
I do.
Course outline? Okay, well, we're doing last week and this Thursday combined into one tomorrow night. So that's basically,
I have good talks.
oh yeah, where are you giving your talk?
In Shrewsbury.
Where's that?
It's in the middle of nowhere.
What's it on?
On my work thing.
Okay, a little bit more.
On my work with the museum and where that's kind of going, and I got invited to the Arts Council there, and it's kind of important. So I better go.
Yeah, I understand. No, you're more than welcome to look at the thing. Okay, thank you so much. That's it.
Technical question. When is the next symposium on photography? Early March?
March 8th.
March 8th.
It's going to be in London. We have to start doing that. Never dull moment.
Was that on here?
No. Oh, is it?
There was something.
There's a big conference at the end of May.
I
That we need to talk about as well. That's on this non-representational work that we're all doing. Barbara Bolt has agreed to be the keynote, which is great. And the day before the conference, Mattia has his viva.
Wow.
No, Mattia. Daniel. Yes, Mattia, yes.
It's a hard basically.
Okay, great. See you guys. It's more like an explosion. More like
So it's not so published saying it's not sort of
yeah.
So, what do I do next week? So I'm quick.
You didn't do too badly today.
reading less than
Yes, read that.